La séance est ouverte. L'ordre du jour appelle la présentation et la discussion du rapport de M. Bogdan Klic au nom de la Commission des questions politiques et de la démocratie sur la sécurité en Europe face à de nouveaux défis. Quel rôle pour le Conseil de l'Europe? Mais M. Klic étant bloqué par un contretemps à l'aéroport, c'est le président de la Commission, M. Soltnemeth, qui présentera ce rapport. Nous devrons interrompre la liste des orateurs à 11h30 afin d'entendre des intervenants du panel de haut niveau sur défendre la sécurité démocratique en Europe. Mais nous la reprendrons là où nous l'aurons interrompu cet après-midi. Monsieur Nemeth, vous avez la parole.
Good morning, Mr. President, Secretary General, dear colleagues. The Russian Federation's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine has shaken the security architecture of Europe. We are coming close to the end of the Helsinki era, which started in 1975 and was fundamentally reinforced in the transition in 1988-89. There are tendencies which try to bring us back to the Yalta period, and that is what we don't want. That is against the intention of us to create, again, a security structure which is based on the sphere of interest principle. The consequences of the aggression on military and economic aspect are incredible and dire. It is probably, I can tell it to you in the name of all of us, that it is high time that diplomats come instead of generals to the process. But what does this new scenario mean for the Council of Europe? What role can the organization, which does not have a defense mandate, play to address the current security challenges? At the core of this report is the notion that security is a wider concept than defense. But we should be aware of the fact that defense has widened its content in the past decades as well, as the hybrid character of the war was clear to all of us in the past couple of months, but years before as well. Human rights, rule of law, media, cyber matters are important aspects of the democratic processes and the compliance with democratic processes, which fall squarely within the remit of the Council of Europe. In this respect, the report underlines that it is necessary to work towards the strengthening of democratic security in Europe. Democratic security is not a new concept for the Council of Europe. It was the central element of the 1993 Vienna Declaration and has since been a main analytical lens for the organization's various activities. But in this new context, the goal to make the organization fully capable of contributing to democratic security, as presented in the declaration, has taken on renewed importance. It's more clear than ever that in order to increase security in our continent, we must reinforce democratic practices in each country and together as well. The respect for democratic standards domestically and the respect for common rules in the international arena are interdependent. In this regard, the current challenges to resilience to democracy is doubly worrying. In addition to domestic repercussions, this development is bound to have consequences on the collective security of Europe if allowed to persist. And in order to confront today's challenges to security, we need to understand the new threats we face The report outlines some of the most important ones. So what can the Council of Europe do more to live up to today's security challenges? Allow me to highlight 4 points which are included in the draft recommendation. One of the key elements of the draft recommendation is the creation of a democratic resilience initiative, which would build on the work of existing bodies and mechanisms to monitor democratic developments in member states and help member states address situations of concern. We are aware of the fact that there is a similar initiative in NATO, but I'm convinced that the Democratic Resilience Initiative Center under the auspices of the Council of Europe is much more opportune. The rapporteur also proposes, among other things, to establish a mechanism to monitor developments related to civil society, freedom of association, and civil participation and engagement in Council of Europe member states. Given the Council of Europe's specific comparative advantage, further consideration should be given to strengthening and expanding the organization's activities relating to confidence-building measures and conflict prevention. May I have 30 seconds, President, because I have a few more points. Finally, building on what was already outlined in other recent reports, the draft recommendation also invites the Committee of Ministers to convene a 4th summit of heads of state and government of Council of Europe member states. This summit would address, inter alia, the promotion of democratic security. I must say, Mr. President, that there has always been vigorous and universal support for this idea among committee members. Each time the topic has come up, we shouldn't forget that 33 years ago, the Council of Europe played a very pivotal role in the transition process. Mr. President, in this new volatile and tense geopolitical context, it is necessary to give a new vigor to the Council of Europe, and it is also necessary to give a new impetus to the European integration process, paying attention not just to the Western Balkans, but to the eastern side and part of Europe. While its mandate doesn't change, the organization's activities need to be refocused in order to confront today's security challenges through a comprehensive security approach. That is why this report is so fundamental. We need a common understanding of how the Council of Europe can best act to address the new security challenges on our continent. I hope this report will contribute to this difficult task, and I ask for your support for the draft resolution and recommendation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Zsolt, for your presentation and for replacing our rapporteur, Mr. Klich. Now, in the debate, I first call Mr. Alexey Gonciarenko from Ukraine, and he speaks on behalf of the ECDA group. Alexey, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I want to address you because I think it's an extremely important moment today, and we are discussing security in the continent and the role of Council of Europe here. I just want to remind you that in 1949, this organization was created to prevent a new awful war in Europe. After awful Second World War, with millions of victims, the idea was to prevent a new war in Europe. And let's acknowledge it, we failed. Today we have, again, awful war in the middle of Europe. Again, thousands of people and tens of thousands of people are killed. Again, neo-fascist regime rules in Russia and now is the threat for the whole continent. That is our failure. So let's make lessons from it. And I think the lesson is only one. We need courage. We need courage enough to make courageous steps, like it was made in 1949 by founders of this organization. It was a courage step. Let's make courage steps, and we can do it every day. I address to those representatives of European Union member states who are here. At the end of the week, there will be summit of European Union. Please support Ukraine as candidate to European Union. Please support Moldova as candidate to European Union. Yes, Georgia, they have now problems. But please don't let Georgian people to be hostage of one oligarch. So, Dzvirpaso Dzmebo, we should support you. And we should say Georgian people should be inside Europe. Give candidacy to Georgia too. Then next week, there will be a summit of NATO. And I address to Turkey, please support Finland and Sweden. And I address to all member states of NATO, please support Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and give membership action plan to us. We should be united. We should be strong enough to fight all threats we have today. I'm sure absolutely that our answer to all challenges we have today, to all threats we have today, is only one: our courage. Be brave like Ukraine. Today, Ukrainians, we were not afraid of Putin, like many here were afraid, and many in Europe were afraid, and they told Kyiv would fail. We did not fail, and we will not fail, never, because we have courage enough to fight for our land and for our country. And I address to you, let's be courageous enough, together, let's make free world strong enough to stop dictators throughout the whole planet. That is a crucial moment. Or we will have, till the end of this century, free world on the whole planet, if we will expand in each year, having more and more nations inside our organizations, or we will shrink and we will disappear under attacks of dictators. So please, be brave like Ukraine, be courageous enough, and I'm sure we will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexey. Prochain orateur est M. Jacques Maire de la France. Il parle au nom du groupe ADLE. Jacques.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bon, après l'intervention précédente, je dois dire qu'au moins au mois de mars, nous avons eu la bonne réaction. Nous avons décidé de façon unanime, avec un consensus du comité des ministres, d'exclure la Russie. Alors certains pourraient considérer que nous avons fait le travail et que maintenant il faut se retrouver dans une situation, je dirais, business as usual. J'ai entendu hier des membres du comité des ministres dire qu'il faut simplement réassurer nos fondamentaux et repartir pour un nouveau cycle. Je pense que si on ne tire pas les conclusions, comme l'a fait le rapport Clich, de ce qu'est la conséquence de cette crise sur notre organisation, nous ne sommes pas à la hauteur. Or, le comité des ministres nous propose un défi important, c'est un sommet de chefs d'État. Ce sommet de chefs d'État, pour nous, c'est vraiment l'occasion de tirer les conséquences des différentes crises que nous voyons à travers ce que nous sommes ici au Conseil de l'Europe. D'abord, évidemment, une crise géopolitique. Une guerre entre États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, c'est un échec du processus de convergence de notre organisation en termes d'état de droit et de respect des souverainetés. Et puis une crise d'efficacité, la longueur des procédures judiciaires, le fait même que nous sommes en attente, mois après mois, d'une décision concernant un cas très important sur la Turquie montre que le sujet n'est pas du tout limité effectivement à la Russie. Et puis, troisième élément, une crise d'attractivité. Vous le savez parfaitement, aujourd'hui, il y a des États qui se posent la question de savoir si nous restons ou si nous sortons du Conseil de l'Europe. Finalement, quel est le coût de sortir du Conseil de l'Europe? Perdre un label sur une carte de visite, mais pas forcément perdre des éléments fondamentaux qui nous rallient à nos collègues. Par rapport à tout ça, il faut que nous soyons à la fois présents dans l'architecture de sécurité, et c'est un défi. Il y a une proposition qui a fait couler beaucoup d'encre ces derniers temps, c'est la proposition d'une communauté politique européenne. Et moi là-dessus, je suis d'accord avec les collègues ukrainiens, géorgiens et moldaves, rien ne remplacera la perspective d'adhésion à l'Union européenne. En même temps, on voit très bien qu'il y a un manque d'intégration, de coopération et de dialogue et d'espace politique. Est-ce que le Conseil de l'Europe peut répondre à cette demande de communauté politique européenne? C'est un des défis sur lesquels je pense que nous devons avoir une réponse. Donc je n'ai qu'un vœu, Monsieur le Président. Bien sûr, au-delà du rapport de M. Clich, c'est que toute l'organisation, notre Assemblée, soit mobilisée dans les jours, dans les semaines, dans les mois qui viennent, pour faire en sorte de contribuer rapidement sur le processus et sur le fond à ce que devra être le niveau d'ambition de ce sommet des chefs d'État. Ne nous l'aurons pas. Si nous n'arrivons pas avec des propositions fortes qui nécessitent des moyens humains et budgétaires significatifs, si nous ne remplissons pas le panier de ce sommet des chefs d'État, il n'aura pas lieu. La balle est aussi dans notre camp, il faut la saisir. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, cher Jacques. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Thomas Pringle from from Ireland, and he speaks on behalf of the UEL group. Thomas, you have the floor.
The role of the Council of Europe is very much the focus of attention now with the conflict in Ukraine. Indeed, sometimes one would be forgiven for thinking this Council has a military arm when listening to the recent debates in the situation in Ukraine. It is understandable from the members from Ukraine to a certain extent, but from some of the other members it is hard to take. I agree with the Secretary-General, Ms Burić, when she said that the Council of Europe is not a security organisation, and let us be clear, it will not be the Council alone that will stop the aggression that is taking place. The question for the Council of Europe, I see it, is whether the adjustments that are taking place will be focused on democratic security. What is democratic security as well needs to be considered. We have to be very careful that we do not see that being eroded through our own activities. The discussion on deep, soft security measures that pepper this document and its approaches needs to be handled carefully. Deep, soft security can have many meanings as far as I can see, and that needs to be protected against as well. What I would see as bordering on military security and breaching the role of the Council of Europe could possibly be construed as okay by another member. There are enough warmongers around without having this organisation adding to them. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly is probably one that springs to mind. We need to be very careful in relation to working with them, as a role may not be the furthering of peace, and we should not confuse that as being the same as what this organisation is working towards. I believe that the Council of Europe has a very important role to carry out, and I would agree with the statement that states should renew their commitment to the values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. As a body, we must be aware that threats to the security and the safety of all of our citizens do not always come from outside. Equality rightly is significant in terms of how citizens live and achieve contentment. Growing inequality is among one of the factors that lead to a feeling of disenchantment with democracy in Europe, as has been pointed to in the report. We all need to focus on our own states and the need to ensure that security is not undermined by inequality and attacks on human rights. There is also the issue of disinformation and the potential impact that it can have on populations. I believe that it is not only the actions of the Russian Federation and China that citizens need to be protected against, and I'm not sure if this organisation can address that either. But maybe having an educated and nuanced population where people can make their own minds up in relation to disinformation is the only way to ultimately protect everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Ahmet Ünal Civikas from Turkey, and he speaks on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Ahmet, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the Assembly. As we are getting closer to the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, it is quite obvious that the international system is transforming. Some blame the pandemic for the changes we are going through. Some try to identify other reasons. But in any case, it is hard to ignore the effect of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, and many agree that European security will never be what it used to be. Things are changing. The existing European and Euro-Atlantic institutions are adapting themselves to the new conditions. NATO is preparing its new strategic concept, which will be adopted next week in Madrid. The European Union has already introduced its strategic compass a month ago to respond to the requirements for a new common security and defense policy in Europe. Migration is becoming the malaise of this century. It is mainly instigated by terrorism, yet the recent Russian aggression is triggering a new series of challenges such as energy shortage, food security, and all these become new elements to increase wider population movements. We are now preparing the 4th summit in the history of this organization. It is quite clear that this report that we are reviewing today is a basic prelude to such forthcoming summit. It underlines the fact that security is a wider concept than defense. It reiterates the need that backsliding of democracy in Europe should be urgently addressed. It calls for support to the role of civil society, support to reinforcing adherence to the rule of law. And this organization is all about these values, which are under serious threat of a growing authoritarianism, depreciation of good neighborly relations, loss of trust and confidence among neighbors. Council of Europe is a fundamental pillar of democracy, human rights, fundamental freedoms. But do we really think that we can reassure the protection of these values for future generations? Are we addressing the root causes of democratic backsliding? Are we mobilizing citizen engagement and creating the conditions for an agile civil society? It is time for this organization to assume the responsibility that it so courageously undertook 72 years ago and to redefine its role in this new international environment. We, as parliamentarians, have an important role to play in diffusing tensions and preventing conflicts. We have to enhance our coordination and cooperation with other international parliamentary assemblies. We have to develop new mechanisms for strengthening such cooperation. And this report, dear members of the Assembly, has a very accurate reading of what we are heading to and has very appropriate recommendations to find the remedy that we all need. The Council of Europe is the fundamental pillar of European democracy, and we have to show our commitment to democratic resilience our community of democratic nations need. With my sincere thanks and appreciation to the rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And now the last speaker in the list of those who speak on behalf of the political groups is Madam Dora Baguiano from Greece, and she speaks on behalf of the EPP CD group. Dora, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to congratulate and thank Mr. Klitsch on the draft report and recommendations he presents to us today. As I told him in Chania during the political committee meeting, this report will be crucial for the future role of this organization. It constitutes one of the few opportunities we have to situate the Council of Europe at the heart of the European architecture during difficult times, times of revisionism and war. I want to underline the way this report acknowledges the various aspects of what security means, what security is, and what therefore can be perceived as a threat to it, as a challenge. Democracy, respect, promotion and protection of human rights, of the freedom of speech, independent judiciary and rule of law, fair and free elections, in one sentence, the values and way of life that have, or more accurately had, unfortunately, guaranteed peace in Europe for more than 70 years. This is our mandate. This is what it's all about. Values which now are violated, revisited, and threatened, not only by Russia, but by other current members of this Council that adopt that kind of attitude. There is a report on the Monitoring Committee on Turkey saying that the country is headed towards an autocracy and not a democracy. A member state that defies democratic values, jails political opponents and activists, labels journalists as dissidents, and threatens on a daily basis the territorial integrity and sovereign rights of neighboring countries and their people, be it Greece or Cyprus. The report of Mr. Klitsch argues that the Council should enhance the long-term security of its member states within its scope of the mandate. So I really believe, dear colleagues, and I conclude, that we must be honest. We must really protect our values. Democracy is the answer to autocracy. Democracy is the future, and this is a fight we must win. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Dora. Now I call in the debate, la prochaine oratrice est Madame Marietta Caramanli de la France. Vous avez la parole, Marietta. Mais elle n'est pas là. So we continue with the next speaker. Notre prochain orateur est Monsieur Frédéric Reiss de la France. Frédéric, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le rapporteur, chers collègues. Le contexte sécuritaire européen s'est considérablement alourdi au cours des dernières années. Après le terrorisme, les crises migratoires et les ingérences informatiques dans les processus électoraux, la survenue de l'agression de la Fédération de Russie à l'égard de l'Ukraine le 24 février dernier a fini de déstabiliser l'équilibre multilatéral de notre continent. On ne peut être insensible à l'intervention passionnée de notre collègue ukrainien. C'est un appel au secours et le droit international, on constate, est de plus en plus ignoré et l'ordre international fragilisé. Face à ces menaces qui pourraient remettre en cause la démocratie, les droits de l'homme et l'état de droit, le Conseil de l'Europe doit réagir. Certes, les questions de défense ne font pas partie de ses attributions, mais la défense de la sécurité démocratique et du multilatéralisme relève, elle, bel et bien de sa sphère d'activité. La lutte contre la désinformation est primordiale, surtout lorsque ce phénomène interfère dans les processus électoraux. Mais comme j'ai eu l'occasion de le développer dans un rapport sur le contrôle de la communication en ligne, la suppression des contenus ne doit survenir qu'en dernier recours et ne concerner que les contenus clairement illégaux afin de préserver la liberté d'expression et la liberté d'information. Plutôt que d'instaurer des outils de censure en aval, les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe doivent agir en amont pour protéger le journalisme professionnel et garantir un écosystème médiatique indépendant et pluraliste. La formation des élèves est également très importante. Les protéger ne suffit pas. Il faut également leur donner les moyens de se protéger eux-mêmes face aux campagnes de désinformation et aux manipulations dont ils pourraient faire l'objet. On constate une défiance grandissante à l'égard de nos institutions. L'abstention élevée aux élections législatives françaises hier est significative. Il s'agit d'un élément de fragilisation démocratique particulièrement inquiétant. Comment redonner confiance aux citoyens en associant davantage la société civile dans les processus de décision et en réaffirmant les fondamentaux encore et toujours. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous invitez les États membres à renouveler leur engagement envers les valeurs de la démocratie, les droits de l'homme et de l'état de droit. Oui, c'est une nécessité. Le Conseil de l'Europe doit réaffirmer avec clarté les valeurs qui sont les siennes. La tenue d'un 4e sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement consacré à ce sujet ne peut qu'être encouragée. Et je voterai bien évidemment en faveur de la résolution et de la recommandation qui nous sont soumises. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci à vous, cher Frédéric. Next speaker on our list is Mr. Armen Gvorzian from Armenia. Armen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, in the past decades, our organization aspired to pursue issues like minority rights, gender equality, diversity, and other important issues for democratic statehood. But we also failed to address more fundamental aspects of democratic peace, that is protection of right to life and right of peoples to self-determination. It seems to me we have begun to treat human destiny rather selectively and very often in the context of geopolitics. Some debates in this assembly show that we have allowed political expediency to make suffering of some Europeans more important than for other Europeans, to make the right of some European peoples for self-determination unconditional, while for others only declarative. We have put much effort to abolish capital punishment in member states, but turn a blind eye on how high-tech industry creates new deadly weaponry and is freely sold in the market. I have never heard of any investigation or fact-finding missions to explore how certain member states use prohibited types of weaponry, such as, for example, white phosphorus bombs. Certain member states have demonstrated that by uses of force and money, some issues can be resolved, while ignoring fundamental rights and freedoms. Mr. President, it has become a strange tradition for our organization to avoid discussing violations of certain fundamental rights and freedoms, explaining it that the Council of Europe does not deal with security issues. This is a very unacceptable position, which essentially encourages new violations. Where and how it is decided that the right of people to self-determination is outside the interest of the Council of Europe, that any military aggression by any member of our organization that kills thousands of innocent people is not our mandate. I try and fail to understand how can the European Parliament speak the language of values and human rights by adopting the relevant language and resolutions, for example, on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, while the Council of Europe and its bodies, including this Assembly, hide behind political correctness and fail to call things by its name. Mr. President, I am raising all these issues with only one aspiration: to contribute to the development of our organization and making it a better fit to our troubled world. I believe it's through the re-establishing an environment of respect, trust, and dialogue that we can make our organization a relevant forum for international cooperation and the protection of values of the free world. Thank you.
Thank you, Armand. Prochaine oratrice dans notre débat est Madame Nicole Duranton de la France. Nicole, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. L'agression armée de la Fédération de Russie envers l'Ukraine a profondément bouleversé notre continent et en partie déstabilisé notre organisation. Se séparer d'un membre n'est jamais anodin, mais les crises peuvent déboucher sur des avancées positives sous réserve que des mesures pertinentes soient adoptées. À cet égard, je suis convaincue de la pertinence du Conseil de l'Europe en tant qu'organisation multilatérale européenne pour défendre la démocratie, les droits de l'homme et l'état de droit. Je suis tout autant convaincue que le statu quo n'est pas possible. Nos débats témoignent de l'ampleur des défis démocratiques et sécuritaires auxquels l'Europe est confrontée, qu'il s'agisse de menaces hybrides, de cybersécurité, de liberté des médias, d'affaiblissement de l'état de droit ou encore de l'apathie civique qui gagne malheureusement du terrain, comme le montre dans de nombreux pays la participation insatisfaisante aux élections. Notre collègue Bogdan Glick rappelle que la sécurité démocratique comporte de nombreuses dimensions, dont l'engagement des citoyens et de la société civile. Je pense que notre Assemblée devrait, en lien avec les parlements nationaux dont nous sommes issus, renforcer son analyse sur les nouvelles façons d'impliquer les citoyens dans les processus de prise de décision, tout en réaffirmant le rôle et la place de la démocratie représentative qui, à mes yeux, est un rouage essentiel de décantation politique et de pacification des conflits politiques internes. Je ne crois pas aux seules vertus de la démocratie participative, souvent manipulable à l'heure des réseaux sociaux et qui ne conduit pas intrinsèquement à l'émergence de compromis politiques. Il me semble également que la réflexion sur le rôle et la place du Conseil de l'Europe doit être l'occasion de repenser le sens de l'appartenance commune à cette organisation, de réaffirmer nos valeurs et ce qu'elles emporte comme conséquence, et soyons clairs, comme contrainte pour les États membres. En disant cela, je pense notamment au respect des décisions de la Cour européenne de droits de l'homme qui doivent être mises en œuvre. Mais on ne peut pas redonner du sens sur la seule promesse de contraintes accrues, même si l'objectif est noble. Nous devons offrir des perspectives positives pour redonner du sens et de la crédibilité à l'organisation, dont le nouveau contexte géopolitique, et donc réfléchir aux moyens de renforcer les éléments d'attractivité de l'appartenance au Conseil de l'Europe, y compris en envisageant des compétences supplémentaires. Je souhaite que nos débats de ce jour puissent y contribuer et mener vers un 4e sommet de chefs d'État ou de gouvernement des États membres du Conseil de l'Europe qui apparaît aujourd'hui absolument nécessaire. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, chère Nicole. Next speaker in our debate is Mr. Max Lux from Germany. Max, you have the floor. Oh, sorry. I'm too quick. First, we call in the debate Mr. Arusyak Yohakian from Armenia, and then we will have Mr. Lux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the Assembly. My conclusion from the analysis of different conflicts, and especially from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, is that the key to global security, peace, is democracy. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has arisen as a human rights issue, and at this stage it is still a human rights issue, which is being considered, which is being negotiated from one side by a society that is on the path of democracy, which is open, where it is very difficult to dictate false agendas, where all issues are discussed rationally, and on the other side by an authoritarian regime. A system where it is very easy to mislead the society, to impose false agendas, to overestimate the external threat. In the context of all this, it becomes obvious that these types of conflicts must be resolved in favor of democracy, because democratic societies do not generate conflicts, they solve conflicts. Among democracies, even the most difficult issues can be easily resolved. If the goal of both sides is peace, if both sides really strive for peace, then the most pressing issues will find solutions. But when we oppose these two systems, the democracy and autocracy, it becomes clear that on the one hand, we are dealing with a real desire for peace, and on the other hand, we only have an imitation of aspirations for peace, which are only attempts to please the international community. That is why it is so difficult for democratic societies to achieve peace in a conflict with an authoritarian state. Categories that have long been rejected by modern Europe, such as historical justice, historical lands, they are just a means to mislead people, create opportunities for foreign interference in the policy making of a given state, a given society. That is why the Council of Europe must stand by the newly established, developing young democracies as opposed to authoritarianism. The Council of Europe must prove to the societies that have taken the path of democracy that the pursuit of peace is right. We must not allow authoritarian regimes achieve their goal. Democratic societies are sometimes disappointed. False nationalist or other demanding ideas start to become dominant in those societies as they see the autocracies succeed in their efforts. In this regard, the Council of Europe has an important mission, dear colleagues. We have to prove the democratic societies that despite the fact the path they have chosen is difficult, they have the support of the civilized world. Dear colleagues, another important thing the Council of Europe must, the PACE particularly can do, is ensuring that at least the resolutions and the recommendations of the Assembly are implemented. This could be another toolkit for ensuring democratic security in the region. From this point of view, we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Next in the debate now, next in the debate, I call Mr. Max Lux from Germany. The floor is yours, Max.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Der Krieg in der Ukraine dauert nicht erst seit 4 Monaten. Er begann 2014 mit der völkerrechtswidrigen Annexion der Krim und er begann als Reaktion auf all das, wofür dieses Haus hier steht. Er begann als Reaktion auf die vor allem mutigen jungen Menschen, die sich auf dem Euromaidan mit der Kraft der Lieder, mit der Kraft des friedlichen Protestes ihre Demokratie und ihre Freiheit erkämpft haben. Und einige derjenigen, die 2014 auf der Straße standen, die mit der Kraft der Lieder protestiert haben, die sind auch heute hier Teil dieser Versammlung für das ukrainische Parlament. Obwohl Krieg in ihrem Land ist, fahren unsere mutigen Kolleginnen und Kollegen aus der Ukraine hier hin. Und das zeigt doch einmal mehr, wie sehr alles auf dem Spiel steht, wofür der Europarat, wofür das europäische Menschenrechtssystem steht. Und ich finde, angesichts dessen muss hier ein für alle Mal die Zeit vorbei sein, wo wir so tun, als könnten wir die Menschenrechte in 45 Mitgliedstaaten völlig unabhängig von der Ukraine verteidigen. Wir müssen uns darüber bewusst sein, dass wir die Menschenrechte nur gemeinsam verteidigen können in Europa. Und das müssen wir uns auch vor dem Hintergrund bewusst sein, dass wir genau wissen, was passiert ist in den letzten Jahren. Wir wissen, wie der Kreml aktiv antieuropäische Kampagnen, Desinformationskampagnen unterstützt hat. Wir kennen die Finanzströme zwischen dem Kreml und einer Faschistin Le Pen in Frankreich. Und ich finde, wir müssen uns wirklich ehrlich fragen, wie wir diesen Europarat neu ausrichten vor diesem Hintergrund. Und deshalb ist es, glaube ich, sehr richtig, dass wir auch über Sicherheitsfragen in diesem Rahmen hier sprechen. Das europäische Menschenrechtssystem ist die größte zivilisatorische Errungenschaft auf diesem Planeten. Doch wenn es mit Gewalt angegriffen wird, dann müssen wir uns auch ehrlich fragen, was unsere Rolle sein soll. Und ich finde, als selbstbewusste und als politische Organisation muss unsere Rolle dann natürlich auch sein, nicht so tun, als seien Sicherheitsfragen völlig losgelöst von uns, sondern sie auch eben ins Zentrum unserer Debatten zu stellen. Und ich finde es ausgesprochen gut, dass beim Ministerinnentreffen in Turin beschlossen wurde, dass dazu auch noch eine High-Level-Expert-Group bis Ende des Jahres Vorschläge machen will. Ich glaube, wir brauchen das Bewusstsein, dass wir unseren KollegInnen in den nationalen Parlamenten, unseren nationalen Regierungen, unseren BürgerInnen in den Wahlkreisen genauso in die Augen schauen müssen, wie wir hier unseren ukrainischen KollegInnen in die Augen schauen. Herzlichen Dank.
Danke sehr, lieber Max. Next in the debate I call Mr. Reinhold Lopatka from Austria. Reinhold, you have the floor.
Yeah. Dear President, dear colleagues, in March 2022, the EU approved its new strategy compass for security and defense at a time when we witness the return of war in Europe. Many of us, like me, we thought after 1989, it cannot happen again. What a big mistake. But the compass now gives the European Union an ambitious plan for action, for strengthening the EU security and defense policy by 2030. The more hostile environment requires our countries to make a big leap forward and increase our capacity and willingness to act and invest more and better in our defense capabilities. Russia's invasion in Ukraine has reaffirmed NATO's importance, revitalizing the alliance and strengthening its preeminent role as a provider of hard security. The alliance will gain additional members, with Sweden and Finland, which are both exposed to potential Russian destabilization attempts or aggression. Putin's attack on Ukraine acts as a catalyst for a new era of security cooperation between the EU and NATO and between EU and non-EU NATO allies, like Turkey. Despite NATO's revival, I have concerns about the US commitment for Europe's defense under a president like Trump. The conflict has again shown the degree of European reliance on the US. But we have to do everything to be strong, and that is how France, I think, sees it. We have to strengthen the EU as a defense actor by itself and an insurance policy against a possible US disengagement from Europe. And at the same time, there has been much closer dialogue between the EU and NATO, and especially since the invasion, there are still obstacles of greater formal cooperation between the EU and NATO. And here the Council of Europe, of course, it's not the security organization, can also play a role. We have a broad spectrum of member states in our assembly, and we should use this. NATO countries and neutral countries like Austria and Ireland, we should work together because always diplomacy and political dialogue will find a solution. Never war can be the solution.
Dank u zeer, lieve Reinhold. Next, before we call in the next speaker, I have to inform the Assembly that our rapporteur, Mr. Bogdan Klic, did manage it to come from Frankfurt to Strasbourg. Thank you very much for being here with us, Bogdan. But you were replaced very well by the chair of the committee, but it's always better that we have the rapporteur here with us. Now in the debate, I call Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland. Kimmo, you have the floor.
Mr. President, the subject of our discussion today is the recent security challenge in Europe, the role of the Council of Europe. I think it's very important for us to try to remember and understand what is the basis of European security structure today. after post-Cold War period when we created, let's say, the new security architecture here. Helsinki Final Act, obviously, Paris Charter stipulates the basics. And obviously, one of the basics is the respect of sovereignty, national security, and territorial integrity of every member state. Obviously, these are the cornerstones. Similar way, each country do have their sovereign right to choose the security arrangements the country itself feels crucial ones. These are the cornerstones. But also, furthermore, the basics of European security architecture is based on the idea of comprehensive, undisable security. The idea clearly is it's a common security in a way that you don't build up your own security on the cost of others, on the cost of your neighbors. And once security problem is a common security problem, we try to solve it together. This is obviously is the basis. The title today is recent security challenges, and we see that one of the previous member states of this organization is brutally breaking the idea of what is common security by attacking another country here. And obviously, the common security comes from the argument. You have heard, obviously, Foreign Minister Lavrov last autumn argued that, yes, the common security is the basis for Russian approach also. You should respect that one. You don't enlarge NATO on the cost of our security, etc., etc. But when they are now bombing Ukraine, when they are killing people in Ukraine, they are actually building up their own security, safeguarding, sacrificing Ukrainians' security. That obviously makes the situation so that the common security became an uncommon security, or common unsecurity. And that's we are now feeling very strongly here, all of us, and we are obviously condemning clearly Russian aggression. The problem there is, and to remember, it's actually not only the question about security in its limited format. It's very much also today the democratization and Europeanization of Ukraine, which is a challenge, and it's a challenge not for Russia or Russian people, it's a challenge for the power structures in Russia. So in that way, we should understand why the democracy issue is the key for our discussion to continue and our values. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimmo. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Sergey Sorbolya from Ukraine. Sergey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. I think that it's only the beginning of serious work that we started from this report. It's impossible to have a security in Europe and whole world without the security and whole organizations that had to provide the peace and stability in Europe and the whole world. Who can imagine in the beginning of 2000s that dictator will come to power in Russia and became the fascist dictator? We can't even imagine that at the beginning of 21st century we will again have concentration camps, but Putin named them filtration camps, where hundreds of thousands of people from occupation territories had to be through a special regime of filtration, where children, women, old people, everybody had to be in a special regime in order to prove that they are loyal to Putin's regime. We know a lot about Bucha, about other occupied territories that are now liberated by our troops. But we can't even imagine what we will see on the territory of Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and other hundreds and hundreds of small villages and cities where the atrocities of fascist regime and fascist Russian army are now on such a rise that I think that we need to really an international tribunal over this regime. I think that a security of energy, of food, It's only the beginning of big plan that we need to fulfill very quickly. Now, it's impossible to do something only by one organization. So the union of such organizations as our, of NATO, of European Union, it's the only way how we can protect peace in Europe and the whole world. How we can do this? When, for example, Ukraine, the first and the only state in the world that provides disarmament of nuclear weapon, now is the main in these atrocities of Putin's regime. I think that our future membership in the European Union and NATO, as well the future membership of other so-called neutral countries that can't be neutral in these circumstances, it's the only way how we protect and we can protect the peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Samat Seidov from Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the rapporteur for this very in time and excellent report. Really, security is a matter. Really, we have to understand what kind of sources could create this instability and insecurity, not only in Europe, all over the world. And it's very obvious. Territorial claims of one state to another, occupation by one state of another state, ethnic cleansing of population, violation of fundamental human rights, and other very, very unacceptable for this organization factors, problems, and disease. We are, in our region, we have experienced all these factors. We were under occupation. We lost our territories. We became a subject of ethnic cleansing. We had, and we still have, 1 million refugees in Azerbaijan. We were in a very unsecurable, unstable situation. And what we did? We returned back everything. We restored international law. We came to the very stable situation in the region, and we proposed the peace to all our neighbors, including, first of all, to our immediate neighbor, Armenia. Unfortunately, my dear friends, my dear colleagues, starting from yesterday, my Armenian friends and colleagues tried to present everything upside down. They tried to present a situation in the region in absolutely different way. My advice to my Armenian colleagues, to find courage, to sit together with Azerbaijanis, just to sit together with Azerbaijanis, just to think about peace, not about presentation at the Council of Europe and attempts to mislead the organization. Just to seriously speak about economic development of all countries in the region, including Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. And by doing so, to do everything in order to open communications, to delimitate and demarcate the borders, to accept the new realities which has been created after the liberation of occupied territories, to be serious with the future of your nation, and not to mislead international organization, not to create more unsecurable situation in the region by talking about security. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Damien Cotier.
Danke, Herr Präsident. Monsieur le Président, le 24 février a été une césure importante pour l'histoire de notre continent, un changement fondamental de paradigme qui nous rappelle finalement les défis auxquels notre organisation a été confrontée dans les années 1990. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle notre Assemblée a raison d'appeler à la tenue d'un sommet des chefs d'État, comme elle l'a déjà fait dans plusieurs résolutions et comme elle le fait à nouveau dans la résolution qui nous est proposée aujourd'hui. Certains se demandent si c'est le bon moment pour un sommet, mais un des responsables de la présidence irlandaise du comité des ministres disait il y a quelques jours, si pas maintenant, alors quand? Face aux défis auxquels notre continent est confronté et notre organisation également, il est absolument nécessaire de se réunir et de redéfinir le rôle et les moyens qui sont à disposition du Conseil de l'Europe pour faire son travail en faveur de plus de démocratie, d'état de droit et de défense des droits de l'homme sur notre continent. Au fond, nous arriverons à résoudre, c'est ma conviction profonde, des crises comme celle que nous traversons uniquement si nous renforçons les valeurs de notre continent, et ces valeurs sont celles portées par cette organisation, je dirais même celles incarnées par cette organisation. Qui d'autre que le Conseil de l'Europe est là pour véritablement défendre, tenir ce flambeau et représenter ces valeurs de démocratie, de droits de l'homme et d'état de droit. Alors parallèlement, les États doivent réfléchir à l'architecture de sécurité du continent. Je dis parallèlement les États parce que ce n'est pas le rôle de cette organisation. Il y a d'autres organisations qui sont des organisations de sécurité. Nous ne le sommes pas. Mais les États dont nous venons ont cette responsabilité de se poser la question, notamment au sein de l'OSCE et d'autres organisations, d'une redéfinition, d'une réinvention peut-être de l'espace et de l'architecture de sécurité européenne. Et tous les pays se posent ces questions, y compris des pays neutres. Certains veulent maintenant rejoindre l'OTAN. Mon pays, la Suisse, qui est un pays à la neutralité permanente, est aussi en train de repenser sa position en termes de sécurité, non pas pour abandonner la neutralité, qui par ailleurs est définie par le droit international, et là je réponds à un des collègues qui s'est exprimé tout à l'heure, et qui ne s'applique pas dans le cas de la guerre d'agression en Ukraine, puisqu'il s'agit d'une violation crasse du droit international. Cette réflexion a lieu, mais peut-être pour un renforcement des collaborations avec les pays de l'OTAN du côté de la Suisse. Donc on voit les réflexions sont en cours, mais notre organisation doit focaliser sur d'autres éléments, la diplomatie et notamment la diplomatie parlementaire, le renforcement du multilatéralisme et donc le renforcement du Conseil de l'Europe lui-même, non pas parce que c'est bien pour notre organisation ou pour nous, mais parce que c'est nécessaire pour l'Europe. Et donc nous devons avoir le courage d'avoir ce débat et d'inviter les chefs d'État à le mener.
Merci, Monsieur Gauthier. The next speaker is Mrs. Emine Nur-Günay.
Thank you, Chair. Dear President, distinguished members of the Assembly. Please allow me, first and foremost, to express my thanks and appreciation to the rapporteur, Mr. Klic, for the excellent reports he has prepared and presented. With the start of the unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine, the international order has been shaken again. The recent crisis has challenged all the international institutions, including the Council of Europe, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the EU, and NATO. In this sense, the timely and unanimous position taken after the start of the war by the bodies of the Council of Europe deserves an appreciation. However, this war has also led to change in the international political arena, such as increasing military spending and seeking new alliances and memberships. So we need to show our dedication to the core values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So we need, but also in this new international context, we need to look for security policies as well, which is a broader concept than defense. Especially while we are asserting our unity and commitments to our values and principles, we should continue our engagements to work on more political dialogues to help member states to expand the Council of Europe's activities, especially with regard to conflict prevention. In this sense, I have listened once again with regret the baseless accusations of Greek chairperson towards my country. Unfortunately, our Greek colleagues continue to use all bilateral and multilateral fora to accuse Turkey. I believe it would be more constructive if they choose to discuss these issues bilaterally and try to solve them. However, instead, they continue to deny the existence of some problems, discontinue the dialogue in others, and continue their baseless accusations. I wonder if this approach is the right way to contribute to the stability of Europe and our region. As Turkey, we always believe in sincere diplomacy, solidarity, and territorial integrity in restructuring European security, and will continue to do so. A very constructive dialogue started between Erdogan and Mitsotakis in April this year. Then what happened? We really cannot understand. So, in short, I believe that the recommendations stated in this valuable report is worthwhile. It shows the roles that fall upon us and the Council of Europe bodies. As clearly stated in the report, I agree that if we would like to have an impact on democratic security, we should work together to reverse the current trend, backsliding of democracy, by focusing on the root of causes. Thank you for your attention.
Le prochain orateur est M. Didier Marie.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, je remercie notre collègue Bogdan Klić pour ce rapport qui nous invite à repenser le rôle du Conseil de l'Europe au regard des nouveaux enjeux de sécurité. L'agression sauvage et inadmissible de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine est un choc majeur pour l'Europe et un défi pour sa sécurité. Mais je partage aussi l'analyse du rapport qui souligne que de nombreuses autres tensions et menaces existent par ailleurs. Face à ces dangers, nous avons besoin d'une approche renouvelée des enjeux de sécurité, suivant la conception globale de l'OSCE, associant les dimensions politico-militaires, économiques, environnementales et humaines. Ainsi, selon cette approche, la protection des droits de l'homme et des libertés fondamentales et la gouvernance économique et environnementale sont aussi importantes pour une paix et une sécurité durable que la coopération politico-militaire. Cette approche renouvelée suppose une articulation nouvelle et une coopération accrue entre les organisations multilatérales œuvrant en Europe, et cela ne peut se concevoir qu'avec l'aval des chefs d'État et de gouvernement des États membres, et je soutiens donc la perspective d'un 4e sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement des États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, en soulignant la nécessité de le préparer activement et d'en déterminer clairement les objectifs et d'y associer, suivant des modalités appropriées, notre Assemblée parlementaire. Je voudrais pour ma part évoquer plus particulièrement l'enjeu des relations de notre organisation avec l'Union européenne, alors que la Commission vient de recommander de donner des perspectives d'adhésion à l'Ukraine, à la Moldavie et à la Géorgie. Il me semble qu'au regard de cet enjeu, mais aussi de l'intensité nouvelle des débats relatifs à l'état de droit au sein de l'Union européenne, il est urgent d'avancer sur la voie de l'adhésion de l'Union européenne à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme et de repenser la complémentarité entre les deux organisations. Le président de la République française a récemment repris le 9 mai une ancienne idée en évoquant la possibilité d'une communauté politique européenne. Cette idée a été diversement reçue et n'a pas forcément été comprise. Au fond, cette communauté politique européenne n'existe-t-elle pas déjà? N'est-ce pas le Conseil de l'Europe? Sous réserve de mesurer la pertinence de son périmètre géographique au regard de l'enjeu et de l'éventuel octroi de compétences complémentaires. Je ne tranche évidemment pas cette question, mais je la pose, car il me semble que la relation à venir entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne est un sujet central, tout en considérant que notre organisation ne doit pas, à mes yeux, dévier de sa mission première de défense des libertés publiques, de l'état de droit et de la démocratie. Il ne faut en rien affadir ce cœur de métier, mais nous devrons gérer de fait, dans ces circonstances nouvelles, le temps de la procédure d'adhésion de nouveaux États membres, qui peut être long, et des relations avec ceux qui ne rejoindront pas l'Union européenne, mais en resteront partenaires. Or, il me paraîtrait préjudiciable de créer une nouvelle structure qui risquerait de brouiller l'architecture multilatérale de l'Europe au moment où celle-ci a besoin d'être clarifiée et optimisée. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Et maintenant, à la parole, Alain Milon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai en mémoire les échanges passionnés que nous avons eus à la Canée lors de la réunion de la Commission des questions politiques. La guerre lancée par la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine a été un choc pour toute l'Europe et invite à réévaluer, voire à repenser en profondeur les enjeux de sécurité et notamment de sécurité démocratique tels que définis par le sommet de Vienne en 1993. Comme le souligne notre rapporteur, il ne s'agit pas uniquement d'enjeux de défense, mais bien aussi d'analyser les enjeux en termes de respect des processus démocratiques, des droits humains et de l'état de droit. Pour ce faire, je suis convaincu qu'il faut réaffirmer le rôle et la place du Conseil de l'Europe, ce qui passe à mes yeux par deux éléments. D'une part, un engagement budgétaire clair des États membres afin que le départ de la Fédération de Russie n'entame pas la capacité d'action du Conseil à un moment où on a le plus besoin. D'autre part, une réévaluation des missions et du mode de fonctionnement du Conseil afin qu'il fasse un meilleur usage de ses organes et mécanismes et qu'il dispose d'une plus grande souplesse et d'une capacité de réaction rapide. Une adaptation en profondeur de l'organisation, seule à même de répondre aux nouveaux enjeux de sécurité, ne peut se faire qu'à l'occasion d'un sommet des chefs d'État ou de gouvernement. Ce sujet a été évoqué lors de la commission permanente à Dublin. Il l'a aussi été lors de la conférence ministérielle de Turin. Il ne s'agit pas de faire un sommet pour faire un sommet, il faut le préparer activement. Un groupe de sages a été mis en place, mais il faudra également que notre Assemblée fasse entendre sa voix. Dans cette perspective, il me paraît utile que chaque délégation nationale puisse engager un dialogue approfondi avec son gouvernement, mais aussi avec les membres de ce comité de sages. Mais comme le souligne notre collègue, au-delà du Conseil de l'Europe, c'est bien l'ensemble de l'architecture multilatérale européenne qui devrait aussi être réexaminée afin de la rendre plus réactive. S'agissant plus particulièrement de notre Assemblée, un renforcement de la coopération avec le Parlement européen, avec l'Assemblée parlementaire de l'OSCE et avec l'Assemblée parlementaire de l'OTAN serait bienvenu. Merci donc à notre rapporteur et merci pour votre écoute.
Merci. And now has the floor our colleague from Canada, Stéphane Bergeron.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux rapporteurs, chers collègues. C'est pour moi un très grand honneur d'avoir enfin l'occasion de m'adresser à vous en personne. À différents moments de notre histoire récente, plusieurs ont prématurément proclamé la victoire de la démocratie libérale. Ce fut notamment le cas lors de la dissolution de l'Union soviétique, d'aucuns suggérant même que cela préfigurait la fin de l'histoire. L'entrée de la Chine communiste dans l'économie de marché et l'essor de l'Internet sur son territoire laissaient présager une ouverture prochaine de la société chinoise qui ne manquerait pas, croyons-nous, d'adopter notre mode de vie. Bref, nombre d'entre nous ont voulu croire à cette illusion réconfortante, allant même jusqu'à se montrer complaisants face à de soi-disant régimes hybrides qui ne devaient être que des étapes transitoires sur le chemin de la démocratie. Malgré les preuves accablantes présentées année après année par des organisations telles que Freedom House et démontrant que la démocratie subissait des reculs, beaucoup se sont accrochés à cette notion de progrès inexorable de la démocratie. Or, l'invasion injustifiable de l'Ukraine par la Russie et l'alliance conclue par cette dernière avec la Chine, qui se montre toujours plus belliqueuse, ont constitué pour plusieurs un réveil brutal, révélant la fragilité de nos libertés et institutions démocratiques dont ne jouit qu'une part congrue de l'humanité. Et force est de constater que l'autoritarisme n'est pas en perte de vitesse, loin s'en faut, puisque certains États dits démocratiques sont même tentés de succomber à ces sirènes. La lassitude et le désengagement croissant des citoyennes et citoyens de nos démocraties constituent aussi un péril mortel qui doit impérativement retenir notre attention. Quel est le lien avec la sécurité, demanderont plusieurs. Le rapport présenté par le rapporteur Clich nous rappelle que la sécurité est un concept qui transcende les seules questions liées à la défense. Elle repose dans une large mesure sur le respect des processus démocratiques, des droits humains et de l'état de droit, dit le rapport, qui poursuit, et je cite, « Nous ne pouvons pas raisonnablement nous attendre à ce qu'un pays qui viole les principes démocratiques sur le plan intérieur soit un partenaire fiable dans ses relations avec ses voisins. » Et le rapporteur Clich nous fournit quelques propositions concrètes pour faire en sorte que le Conseil de l'Europe puisse faire face à ces nouveaux défis, comme le fait par exemple de créer une nouvelle structure ayant pour but de renforcer la résilience démocratique des États membres et d'y suivre entre autres l'évolution de la liberté d'association et de la participation civile. Qu'allons-nous faire de cette de ces propositions éminemment intéressantes et de toutes les bonnes idées qui auront été formulées aujourd'hui. Le temps des bonnes intentions est révolu. Il faut maintenant passer à l'action. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci, cher collègue. Now has the floor Kamal Yafarov.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I have to say that I'm very disappointed with the report not being comprehensive enough. Security is a wider concept than the defense, by the way, which is not a direct mandate of the Council of Europe. In coffee breaks here, MPs, we often discuss about the rising energy prices, rising food prices, and inflation, which this report failed to mention at all. Furthermore, that today the world is already different with unpredictable consequences. Therefore, new approaches are needed to define and address the global food and energy security. By new approaches, I mean to have an open discussion between contradicting different opinions, which this report also fails to include. First key question is, what kind of role Council of Europe prescribes itself for addressing the global energy and food security? Dear friends, furthermore, it's a natural human impulse, and even a political one, to turn inward when threatened by a crisis that appears beyond our control. And these threats could hasten the retreat that many countries are already making away from the globalization and the cooperation. For example, the Economist journal states that the wheat prices went up by 6% after India announced that it will suspend the export. This is the wrong lesson to draw. Global food crisis clearly shows that world's problems are intimately linked, as are the solutions. More international coordination and cooperation is required from all stakeholders to navigate the path forward the crisis. And second key question is how the Council of Europe will facilitate the coordination and cooperation for the resolution of the global food and energy security. Dear colleagues, I'm in a strong belief that we need to have an urgent debate on the global food crisis. We need to prepare a new, separate, comprehensive report about these issues. And we need to show our strong position as soon as possible. Thank you.
And now, Mrs. Gourmay for 2 minutes.
Very much, dear colleagues. The link between security and human rights is important. The link is reinforced if we consider that human rights define human security. Individual, international, and national development requires the protection of human rights. Therefore, you cannot have security without protection of human rights. Development requires respect for human rights, and respect for human rights prevent conflicts. Peacemaking must be built on human rights foundation, and peacemaking and peace building must likewise give a central place to human rights consideration, as indeed must incorporate human rights strategies, said Dr. Bertrand Rachmaninov, former acting UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And indeed, as we look forward to restore and rebuild peace in the continent, we have to strengthen the protection mechanism of human rights further than before. Russia's unprovoked war of aggression resulted in genocide and war crimes in the land of Ukraine by the aggressor. Meanwhile, we face an economic and social crisis as a result of the war, both the war and the resulting social and economic crisis, affecting those who are in need the most. The most susceptible part of society, who does not have the financial ability to flee, or those who do not have the ability to maintain their level of life because of lack of saving and lack of opportunities, are the ones paying the price at every crisis. Thus, the report's goal, which aims to strengthen equality also in social and economic dimension, is very welcome. It is important to note, however, that the strengthening of such rights is not only important because without it people lose their trust in politics and politicians, but also because without socioeconomic equality, the protection of human rights is impossible, because those who might face infringement in relation to their human rights do not have the ability and opportunity to protect themselves otherwise. We in Hungary have a first-hand experience of the control of a government can hold over a vulnerable population. Even the slightest mention of loss of security and the smallest possibility of loss in quality of life resulted in massive support regardless of the truth of the original statement. The statement alone that Hungary would join NATO troops into Ukraine if we are obliged to do so resulted in a considerable increase of support for the government who opposed this idea. Of course, to achieve this, Viktor Orban had to use its media empire, which has created and it maintained in a way that is a violation of human rights and the rule of law to begin with, but the results are clear as Orban Viktor is given yet another supermajority, which he immediately abused to put Hungary into a special legal order because of the war in Ukraine. In this legal order, he is allowed to do whatever he wants, including the infringement of human rights in a more substantial way that would normally be allowed by necessity and proportionality. In short, the report is right. We need to strengthen human rights, social and economic security, and the rule of law, or we risk to lose them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, François Calvet.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, je remercie notre collègue Bogdan Klić pour ce rapport qui souligne combien nos États sont interdépendants pour leur sécurité et leur stabilité et qui pointe les enjeux auxquels le Conseil de l'Europe doit faire face pour continuer à jouer pleinement le rôle de vigie démocratique, mais aussi pour apporter sa contribution à la sécurité démocratique de l'Europe. Je voudrais évoquer tout particulièrement 3 points soulevés par ce rapport. Le premier concerne l'enjeu de la lutte contre la corruption qui gangrène l'état de droit de manière inquiétante dans un certain nombre d'États membres, comme nos travaux en témoignent. Je partage la conviction de notre collègue lorsqu'il estime que le Conseil de l'Europe doit mettre davantage l'accent sur ce sujet, notamment en valorisant encore davantage les travaux du Gréco et qu'il nous faut aussi revoir les procédures de suivi du Conseil de l'Europe pour les renforcer. Ma deuxième remarque porte sur l'initiative de résilience démocratique que prône notre collègue afin de suivre les évolutions démocratiques dans les États membres en s'appuyant sur les travaux des organes et mécanismes existants du Conseil de l'Europe afin de prévenir les violations des normes du Conseil de l'Europe et de proposer les mesures pour renforcer la démocratie et l'état de droit. C'est assurément une idée intéressante qui suppose un travail de fond permanent et qui doit impliquer les membres de notre Assemblée. Je partage également l'idée de renforcer encore les liens avec la société civile afin de détecter les signes avant-coureurs d'un affaiblissement des procédures démocratiques. Mais tout cela n'aboutira à des résultats tangibles que si nous sommes collectivement convaincus dans chacun de nos États de la pertinence d'appartenir au Conseil de l'Europe, que si nous sommes en capacité de réaffirmer nos valeurs communes et de nous y tenir, même et surtout quand nous sommes condamnés par la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. C'est pourquoi je soutiens avec force la perspective d'un nouveau sommet des chefs d'État ou de gouvernement des États membres du Conseil de l'Europe qui permettent de refonder en quelque sorte le sens de cette maison commune et d'accorder des compétences et des moyens adaptés aux enjeux de notre temps. Je vous remercie.
Now I have the floor, Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, let me first recall the title of this report and respectively the draft resolution, Recent Challenges to Security in Europe, What Role of the Council of Europe? And I want to express my gratitude to the rapporteur to put in it exactly like this. Answering the question regarding the role of Council of Europe, we have to work on updating the understanding of the basic mechanisms of its functioning and our cooperation within it. This new vision and new understanding will give us the opportunity to rebuild and update the system that obviously failed to prevent one member state from the military aggression of the other. Today, all the free and democratic world is concerned with the human rights violations and actually genocide, which came with the war of Russian aggression against Ukraine. This issue is challenging not only the Council of Europe, but all the multilateral architecture of rule of law and protection of human rights, including the OSCE and NATO as well. It goes without saying that the European Union should become a party to the European Convention on Human Rights. It should also strengthen its sanctioning regime against those who breach human rights on massive legal, repeatedly and continuously. Thus, the regimes that support anti-democratic actions should pay the highest possible cost for gross human violations, rights breaches and breaches of international law. It is essential that finally, after so many years of disagreements, the Council of Europe and the European Union should establish and maintain in the most efficient manner the unique and single legal space for protection of human rights in Europe. The spectator's role of Council of Europe was a wrong choice, and the decision of excluding the Russian Federation from the organization was right, but too late. It is not a good time for Europe to fall into uncertainty. Europe should be united. Europe should seek to establish international security by working on making the compliance with international law, rule of law, human rights, an essential component of its external relations, the foundation for economic and other types of cooperation. Without such an approach, sustainable peace and security cannot be established. Finally, I want to thank the distinguished rapporteur for this important and timely document, and this is significant work on the mistakes that were made and a big contribution to save future of people in Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Altunyaldis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, dear President, to begin with, I would like to thank the rapporteur for preparing this important report at the time of all European countries are discussing the changing security environment in our continent. Over the past years, we have been facing an increasingly complex and diverse set of transition threats, such as climate change, pandemics, increasing migratory movements, disinformation campaign, and etc. Against all these exceptional challenges, countries have adopted more wider understanding of security, focusing more on soft security than hard security in recent decades. However, Russian aggression against Ukraine has diverted, once again, the attention on conventional military conflict. Traditional notion of deterrence and defense once again in top of our agenda in Europe. Considering the transnational nature of these threats, we need a collective response based on effective multilateralism. In this regard, the Council of Europe offers us an important platform to tackle these problems collectively. Dear friends, however, we all have seen a speech made by a delegate of Greece that is supposed to be speaking on behalf of EPP and on the issue of overall European security. Yet unfortunately, she has chosen to misuse her role to be able to mislead the Assembly by arising bilateral issues instead. No doubt that NATO is the main pillar of European security in terms of deterrence and collective defense. We must unite on NATO and strengthen its deterrences. Turkey, as one of the most dedicated and powerful member of NATO, has proven to be an essential part of European security architecture even in critical times. I blame the statement made by Greek delegation member, putting her cynical threat perceptions ahead of common security challenges, which I think we should deal with here in Assembly in real and common and general issues to secure all over the Europe. I thank you.
So, and now is the next speaker, Lord George Foulkes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been listening very closely to every contribution to this debate. Can I say I've warmly welcomed the report by Mr. Klitsch. I think it's the way forward. But frankly, I've been disappointed by some of the contributions. For example, the contribution from Ireland, from Mr. Pringle and from Mr. Cottier from Switzerland, who imply or who argue in favour of the very narrow definition of security that Madam Burić puts forward, unfortunately, that security only involves the architecture of security and the deployment of troops and that aspect of it. Security is much more than that, and that's why Mr. Klitsch's report is absolutely right. What is our responsibility? Our responsibility, the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. Now, on the rule of law, what do we see? We see people being murdered in Ukraine, children being murdered. We see the Geneva Conventions being ignored. We see, and we discussed last time, war crimes that are being committed. This is our responsibility. This is part of the rule of law. And this is security as well. And the second aspect of human rights, the right to education, the right to a decent health service, the right to life. That is our responsibility. Those are human rights. And think of the children, as I argued on the last occasion. These children that are being killed, they could grow up to be architects, to be scientists, to be medics, to contribute to all of our futures. And they are being killed, they are being massacred. Is that not part of our responsibility? Is that not part of security? And then democracy. The Ukrainians are fighting to protect their democracy, of course, but they're also fighting to protect our democracies, all of us, because it's there in the front line now, but who will be in the front line next? So that must be our responsibility. And that is why all the organs, and I say this to Madam Burić, all the organs of the Council of Europe must be mobilized. The Convention, the Court of Human Rights, of course this Parliamentary Assembly, but also the whole structure of the Council of Europe must be mobilized to ensure that Russia is defeated and Ukraine and the Ukrainian people are protected. That must be our responsibility.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Juhacz.
Thank you, Mr. President. The European history reached a nightmare of 24th of February this year. We all thought that in the context of the Council of Europe, we are on the way to create a future where the above phenomena should not exist. The Council of Europe can play a role in building confidence among its member states. Dedicated programs of confidence-building measures can contribute to the overall security situation in Europe. The strength of the organization is to work for a better understanding of each other. Furthermore, the Council of Europe has been contributing to standard setting in important security policy areas for decades, including the fight against terrorism, trafficking in human beings, and cybercrime. The organization is a global standard setter on cybersecurity. We would like to underline that the adoption of the new second additional protocol to the Budapest Convention adopted during the Hungarian presidency of the Committee of Ministers. I profoundly agree with the rapporteur when it comes to democratic security. The protection of the rights of national minorities should not be omitted from our focus. Unsettled conflicts can amplify tensions within the Council of Europe, enhance misunderstanding and deepen mistrust among member states. In accordance with the Vienna Declaration in 1994, and as highlighted by the Secretary General in her 2022 annual report, the protection of national minorities is an essential and constitutive element of stability and democratic security in our continent. Although within the remit of our organization, we have a well-developed system of monitoring and scrutiny mechanism and procedures in place. Effective monitoring mechanism can serve as early warning system of rights violations. It is evident more than ever that security should not be taken as granted. This applies both to economic security, characterized by steadily increasing inflation, soaring energy prices, and utility costs in the past several months, public health security regarding the COVID-19 pandemic globally, and its aftermath in the last 2 years, and lately, military security given the unacceptable and unlawful Russian aggression against Ukraine. In such turbulent times, full of multifaceted challenges, our organization should act in the spirit of the statute and seek to make all efforts possible and mobilize all means available to achieve lasting peace in Europe. This is the ultimate objective we ought to pursue and the most important mission for the Council of Europe to live up to nowadays. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, now we expect the high-level panel, and I have to interrupt the list of speakers. We will return to the debate this afternoon, and we now wait for our special guests.
Dear colleagues, as we have some delay in the arrival of our guests for the high-level panel, we are able to take one more speaker. Next in the debate, I call
Mrs. Fataliev.
Mrs. Fataliev.
Yeah, she's there.
You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me start from expressing my appreciation to the rapporteur for these important discussions and raising such an important issues like cybersecurity, disinformation, migration issues, extremism, energy security, and many others. And I think that these all provide security of people, security of state in every state. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem of security is relevant at all times for every state. And all countries of the world are carefully working out their national security systems in order to withstand all the challenges of the development of the modern world. However, the processes of globalization progressively influencing the development of all spheres of society and the state contribute to the creation of completely new and more sophisticated threats, not only to international peace and law and order, but also to international security, to energy security, and even ecological security. And speaking about international security in broad sense, it should be understood as a system of international relations based on the observance by all the states of all universally recognized principles and norms of international law, without which it is impossible to develop collective regional and national systems. And also we have to speak about the cooperation, whether it's international or regional. And today, as a representative of Azerbaijan, I want to speak about the post-war situation in our region. After the restoring of territorial integrity of our country, Azerbaijan today promotes peace because we want stable region, because we want sustainable development of the region. We want to move forward to aim at normal coexistence with Armenia, and we're ready to guarantee rights of security of all people of Azerbaijan, including those who want to live in Karabakh, regardless their ethnicity. In current situation, of course, we promote absolutely new agenda. Which is coming out from the new realities, which contains issues of regional importance, and such as ecological security, transboundary rivers, which damages regional environment, transportation issues, new opportunities with respect to transit, especially taking in account that Azerbaijan is now coming closer to the completion of its portion of the Zangezur corridor. We speak about the new routes, we speak about energy security. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly believe that international security is not possible without international cooperation. And if we speak about the roles of international organizations in any particular Council of Europe, I think that we have to do our best to be ready, giving prompt and just reaction on the processes going on in member states, and make our decision directed to peace and stability to be implemented immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Seven. Now I have to interrupt this debate, and we will now start with the high-level panel. Please remain on your seats, because we will continue in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague, dear guest to our high-level panel, it is now my honor to open this next event, a high-level panel, an interactive debate with you, colleagues, on upholding democratic security in Europe. The notion of democratic security is not new. It was first endorsed by the heads of state and government of the Council of Europe at the 1993 Vienna summit, but it is as relevant as it was then as it is today. It has severely been damaged by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. A blatant violation of international law is a direct and real threat to peace and stability on our continent. It has severely damaged the existing mechanisms of multilateral cooperation. It puts at risk the lives and well-being of millions of European citizens, first and foremost the Ukrainians, with whom we stand in solidarity here today. But it also does affect hundreds of millions of European citizens who are not directly touched by the war. including those in the Russian Federation, but also in Belarus, who oppose the war and strive to uphold democracy and fundamental rights against authoritarian and undemocratic governments. With them, we stand in solidarity today as well. The Council of Europe, as you know, is not in charge of hard security. Its role in addressing the consequences of the war of aggression, which is waging on the continent, is nevertheless very important. Because sustainable peace cannot be built without respect for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That is what democratic security is about. In this morning's debate, we debated ways of promoting democratic resilience of our societies and rejuvenating the functioning of democracy. To enrich our debate further, we now invite our distinguished speakers to share with us their vision on upholding democratic security in Europe on the basis of their comprehensive political experience and insight into multilateral diplomacy. Now, first on my list is His Excellency Mr. Simon Coveney, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence of Ireland and current President of the Committee of Ministers. Mr. Coveney, we are very thankful for the commitment of your country towards a renewed, improved and reinforced Council of Europe. In times of crisis, as we spoke about this morning, leadership is key. And you, Mr. Minister, you do now lead our Committee of Ministers. So we are very eager to get first your statement on behalf of the Presidency, and then we will have our panel with Madam Tsikhanouskaya from Belarus, with the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Finland, and with our own Secretary General. But first, Mr. Minister, I invite you to make your opening remarks.
Thank you, President Cox, and I'm honoured to be speaking with a distinguished panel, with Sviatlana, with Pekka, and also with Marija, of course. This week, 59 years ago, another president addressed our Parliament in Dublin. John F. Kennedy spoke of our nation's values, our commitment to human rights and multilateralism, democracy, and the rule of law. He observed that while Ireland pursues an independent course in foreign policy, it's not neutral between liberty and tyranny, and never will be. That was true then, and it's true now. Ireland has been unequivocal in our support for Ukraine's liberty and our condemnation of the Kremlin's tyranny. 50 years after our own accession to the European community, we firmly endorse Ukraine's candidate status for EU membership, because we recognise the people of Ukraine are doing more than defending their state's territorial integrity, vital as it is. But they're protecting the values Kennedy spoke to, reminding us at once how fragile our freedoms continue to be and how precious they are. In my few words this morning, I want to touch on three factors I consider critical to securing democracy on our continent today. Firstly, how we protect the integrity of our public institutions. Secondly, how we promote the prosperity of our citizens. And thirdly, how we understand the demos in democracy, how we understand our people better, their psychology, and what motivates them in the political choices that they make. First, our institutions. We must be clear in what we strive to protect. Democracy demands more than majority rule. It is a three-legged stool, if you like. To stand, it needs not only free elections, but adherence to an impartial rule of law and a respect for human rights. Understood this way, illiberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. An illiberal politician may be a majoritarian, but they cannot be a democrat. Securing democracy demands that we protect the tapestry of institutions that collectively hold states and all of us to account. It means safeguarding freedom of expression, association, and assembly. It means promoting independent, impartial, and an efficient judiciary. It means guaranteeing the absolute integrity of our electoral systems. Democracy is a precious metal, but it tarnishes easily. Without a press freedom, without vibrant civil society, without independent courts, democracy corrodes. And we've seen the consequences when that happens. And over time, gradually, then suddenly, can collapse into autocracy. If we're to avoid this trend, as democratically elected leaders, we must recommit to the first principles of the Council of Europe. That is why, in the wake of war on our continent, I believe it's time to convene a fourth summit of Council leaders. Why Ireland has made support for the Council's core institutions, above all the European Court of Human Rights, the first priority of our presidency in the months ahead. And why I welcome and hope to see implemented so many of the recommendations from Senator Bogdan Klich's excellent report on recent challenges to security in Europe, including his proposal to establish a democratic resilience initiative. One of democracy's great virtues is its inherent capacity for self-correction. In the long run, this unique mechanism means democracies are better placed to deliver stability and prosperity for all of our citizens. But as Keynes put it, in the long run, we are all dead. If democracies are to thrive today, we need to convince citizens, young people in particular, of our capacity to deliver over short time horizons, as well as planning for the long term. Key to that is improving the quality of governance, public services, and decisions taken in the exercise of public authority. How do we do this? There are many steps. One is to listen more directly to our citizens and, above all, our younger generations. More than that, to make them heard and to empower them. Ireland's experimentation with citizens' assemblies over the past decade has been a hugely positive experience for us in that respect. While far from a panacea, for us at least, it has proved a way of deepening democratic engagement, bolstering trust, and improving public policy more generally. Collectively, I believe, we need to learn from such experiences and share them widely. Equally and finally, we must strive to better understand the essence of democracy, the demos, or the people, that we represent. Here in Strasbourg, human rights and the rule of law are concrete terms. But for most of the Council of Europe's 675 million citizens, they're somewhat abstract. If we're to convince a new generation of their value, we need to communicate them differently. Through a decade and a half of democratic decline, autocrats have understood this well and acted on it, both at home and abroad, communicating concretely, shaping stories, sometimes completely false, promising simple solutions to complex problems, appealing to emotions, most often to, most powerfully, fear, but also our desire for connection, self-worth, and identity. Much of this might be dismissed as disinformation by us. And certainly we need new and better tools to counter untruths, above all on digital platforms. But we must also understand why those appeals do resonate to increasing numbers of people, and draw lessons when we come to make the case for inclusive, diverse democracies. Because we will not defeat falsehoods with fact-checking alone. We need to counter them with positive and compelling narratives of our own. Populists and autocrats have no real vision for the future. Their defining narratives are rooted in an imagined, often imperialist past. In such hands, history can be a terrible weapon. A year ago, we read Vladimir Putin's long essay on Russia and its ties to Ukraine. His version of history was false, but for him it provided a pretext for invasion. It falls to us as Democrats to counter such false histories. But we must also celebrate great truths. So let me finish now, not with history, but with her story. All here know the bravery of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, sorry, Sviatlana, leader of democratic Belarus. What some of you may not know is her connection to my country, to Ireland. As a young man, before I entered politics, I helped raise funds in support of a charity called the Chernobyl Children's Project, which has come to be the single largest contributor to try to respond to the consequences of that Chernobyl disaster. Sviatlana, in some ways in Ireland, is known as a Chernobyl child. One of those thousands of children who come to Ireland for respite in the wake of disaster. She was hosted in a small Tipperary town, for those of you who know Ireland, called Roscrea, by the Dean family, Marion and Henry, and returned to them summer after summer, in time helping to mentor other children, many of them traumatized. One of the qualities we value most in Ireland is hospitality. Indeed, one of our 3 presidency priorities, to foster a Europe of inclusion and diversity, is framed in the title Fáilte, a word that Sviatlana knows very well, which means welcome in Irish. Her story reflects some of what makes our democracies great: the capacity for empathy, connection, kindness, values shared across many miles that separate Minsk from Tipperary, or for that matter, Cork to Kyiv. And that carry over ages. Democracy is never a final achievement, President Kennedy once said. It is a call to untiring effort. So let us never forget, and let us better explain what makes this effort so very worthwhile, particularly in the context of the continent that we need to protect today, a continent at war, a continent that has seen 6 million refugees having to travel because of war and violence and brutality and aggression into other parts of our continent where they are receiving hospitality and protection. This institution needs to rise to the occasion, in my view, in terms of the responsibilities that we have to protect democracy, to protect the rule of law, and to protect human rights in the context of the history that is unfolding in our time. So I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and I think that I can speak on behalf of the Assembly that we are very happy that we are in the next months in your hands, under your leadership on the Irish presidency of the Council of Europe. And thank you very much for your introductory remarks. Now we will have 3 keynote speakers on the issue, and our first speaker is not a head of state, is not a minister. Normally this assembly is addressed by heads of states and ministers, but what does not exist now could happen in the future. Her name was already mentioned by the minister, and her name has been mentioned often in this in this hemicycle, although it is a quite difficult name for many of us to pronounce, Sviatlana. But nevertheless, we are most eager to listen to the leader of the Belarusian opposition, whose name has been mentioned in reports, in discussions, and who will now address us. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, you have the floor, madam.
Dear President Cox, Secretary General Burić, Minister Coveney, Minister Haavisto, honorable members of the Assembly. Today, we speak about Senator Klich's report on the role of the Council of Europe. It made me think of the man who first publicly proposed the creation of this organization to unite Europeans around their democratic values, Sir Winston Churchill. A few days ago, I watched his address given in Zurich not long after the Second World War. In his speech, Churchill spoke of the tragedy of Europe, how our noble continent, despite all its remarkable achievements, was unable to avoid a series of horrible, destructive wars. But it was not a speech of despair. Rather, Churchill spoke of hope, that former aggressors and victims could become a new European family, united in peace, freedom, and prosperity. That tragedy could be transformed into promise through values-based cooperation in international organizations, like the one I'm addressing today. Nearly 80 years later, we see how right he was. Yet, despite this remarkable progress, the tragedy of Europe is not yet over. The fires of war burn again in our continent. And again, voices are heard urging us to appease rather than oppose behavior that is the antithesis of everything this organization stands for. Ladies and gentlemen, we must once and for all end the tragedy of Europe. In Belarus, it is unjust imprisonment, torture, and the death penalty, dictatorship and censorship, corruption and theft of our national resources, the sale of our sovereignty to maintain power, hijacking of the international flight to seize active citizens, abuse of migrants to create chaos on our borders, and the use of our country as a launching pad to attack and threaten our neighbors. This is not what we Belarusians want for our country and for Europe. Our victory in the 2020 election was a message loud and clear. We are Europeans, and we want our country back to Belarusians and back to Europe. Last year, my address at the European Parliament here in Strasbourg was a warning that the tragedy of Belarus will become a new tragedy of Europe if it's not met with a determined, principled, and practical response. In light of events since then, I was right. This message has only become more urgent. Will the tragedy of Europe continue because good governments give up on their values and fail to act in time? Ukrainians haven't given up on those values, and they have shown the courage to act. They know that an attack on their sovereignty is an attack on the sovereignty of all. They know that giving the bear a bite only whets its appetite. Ukrainians continue to fight and believe as the tragedy of Europe continues. We Belarusians haven't given up on those values either. Our people continue to resist even after widespread crackdowns in the last 2 years. Some 2,000 people have been detained for protesting the war on Ukraine. More than 80 acts of sabotage against the Russian military have been carried out by our partisans inside Belarus. And up to 1,500 Belarusian volunteers have joined the Ukrainian army. And one of them is Timur Mitschevich. He was 17 years old when police beat him unconscious in the first days of our peaceful protests in 2020. He was in coma for a week. His mother died of stress. Our people helped Timur to flee to Czechia, where doctors got him back on his feet. And this spring, he went to defend Ukraine. Timur understands that the threat Ukraine faces today is bigger than a threat to just one country. That the fight in Ukraine is a fight for your freedom and ours. Timur, like many Belarusians, continues to fight and to hope as the tragedy of Europe continues. If the aggressors are allowed to prevail, prospects for freedom and security in Europe will diminish substantially. An emboldened empire with more than a foot inside Europe's door. New threats across the region, new resources to manipulate. If, however, the current threat is contained, if we become together to demonstrate that respect for freedom and human rights are the basis for peace and prosperity, we may yet overcome the tragedy of Europe. In order for that to happen, we must sanction the aggressors that threaten us. At the same time, we must extend a hand of friendship and support to the people of those countries. This is an important distinction. The regime that do wrong should be punished. At the same time, ordinary people who do right should be encouraged. Encouraged because one simple fact: we belong to Europe. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we need to have more Council of Europe in the lives of Belarusians and more Belarus in the Council of Europe. This cooperation should be built along two major avenues: institutional building and society development. And I'm asking today the Council of Europe to establish a steering committee on the relations with Belarus. It should be composed of the various bodies of the Council of Europe and the representatives of the democratic forces and civil society of Belarus. This group would jointly determine the priority areas of cooperation. It will conceive, prepare, and launch assistance programs and projects and oversee their implementation. This is one, but a very concrete and practical step, and it is also my simple answer to today's question of the discussion on what is the role of the Council of Europe. The role of the Council of Europe is to bring Belarus closer already now. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the history of our continent to show us the way. Our values are our strength. And today we must use every bit of our strength to defend those values for the sake of all Europe. We have the power to end the tragedy of Europe once and for all, and to hold out the promise of Europe to all who aspire to live together in freedom, peace and prosperity. So let us do it. Thank you. Живе Беларусь. Слава Україні, and long live Europe.
Before starting, Sviatlana was asking other people in the room. You have seen there are people in the room. They listened very carefully to your first address in this esteemed hemicycle. You said we want to have more Council of Europe in Belarus, and we need more Belarus in the Council of Europe. You made a concrete proposal, but you also had your first address here, and you have seen and listen to the applause. I think it has been appreciated very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now we are going to listen to a representative of a country that often is seen as lying somewhere in the north, far away from everything, the most happy people on earth, but for the rest you do not hear much about it. But now it is in the heart of Europe, because it lies very close to the member state that we had to exclude here. It shares an enormous border, and it's also involved in how to find its way in international organizations, in international cooperation. It has a long-standing experience in dealing with difficult questions, and therefore I'm most happy that I now can ask to come to the rostrum the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pekka Haavisto from Finland. You have the floor, Pekka.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, President of the Committee of Ministers, Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Madam Tsikhanouskaya, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here today at this timely event to explore common ways to uphold democratic security in Europe. And particularly when I was walking to this building in the morning, I remember that I have been here 33 years ago, 1989, when Finland was not a member of Council of Europe. We were part of the parliamentary delegation from Finland to explore what is this organization about, and when we returned home, we made a recommendation that Finland should be member of Council of Europe, and that happened. First of all, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has profoundly shaken everyone's sense of security. First, we have to focus on supporting and helping Ukraine, not least on the issue of accountability. In the longer run, we must continue strengthening democratic security for all in Europe. We must ensure that the Council of Europe remains the benchmark for human rights, democracy and the rule of law in Europe. It's a strong defender of our democracies, our institutions and courts, and indeed the free voices of our citizens. We want a strong organization that can protect its core values, as it clearly has done this spring. The ability to vote and to take majority decisions is an advantage of our organization. At the same time, we need to make use of the lessons learned and end democratic backsliding in Europe. The major neglect of human rights, democracy and the rule of law in Russia was a precursor to the war against Ukraine, the lack of press freedom, the banning of NGOs, foreign agents laws, disregard of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, etc. The list is unfortunately long. Therefore, considering the new reality in many parts of Europe, with increasing populism and nationalism, disregard of minority rights, more hate speech and deliberate weakening at once independent institutions, we need to return to the core values of the Council of Europe and review the priorities of the organization as we agreed in Turin. This requires more openness and transparency. Secondly, for Finland, enhancing the participation of civil society and national human rights institutions in the work of the Council of Europe, as well as protecting human rights defenders, is a priority. Civil society and national human rights institutions are already actively consulted in standard setting, but they should also be involved in the shaping of the future of the organization. The Committee of Ministers need to open up more and exchange views with a broad variety of stakeholders. I thank Foreign Minister Coveney and the Irish Presidency for their many efforts on more transparency. At least some of these exchanges must be made public in the spirit of the 2019 Helsinki decisions on civil society. Excellencies, dear colleagues, civil society and human rights defenders in Belarus and beyond need our support. In Belarus, the regime has liquidated over 300 NGOs. More than 1,200 people are currently political prisoners, including many minors. These people should be released immediately and without preconditions. In Turin, several colleagues stressed that the Council of Europe needs to work with civil society. As the General Secretary, Madam Burić, stated, we need to empower those who do not agree with the brutal politics of aggression practiced by their political leaders. This is exactly what the Council of Europe and its member states need to do now. We are at the historic junction where support to democratic forces is in high demand. We have to be innovative to find ways to support civil society, human rights defenders and free media in Belarus, and quite separately also in Russia. This can be done through dialogue and tools that we have available and tools that are yet to be created. I would like to turn to Madam Tsikhanouskaya to say that opposition groups and parties are equally worthy of support. The Council of Europe can have a role in demonstrating concrete support to opposition groups that are working for democracy and human rights. Democracy needs people who work relentlessly to counter the actions of authoritarian leaders. You are one of those courageous persons. My hope is that all European countries could become members of the Council of Europe, but there are two overall preconditions for this. First, they respect the statute of the organization, and secondly, they respect its core values. This can never be compromised. Finally, Excellencies and colleagues, the Council of Europe can be one of the guarantors of democratic security in Europe. We should respect and use the tools it offers in order to give the organization a chance to help us uphold our commitments. Monitoring activities could be further developed so that we can make sure that commonly agreed standards are met. A strong Council of Europe is needed to ensure human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and to prevent future wars and conflicts. These values must be the building blocks of our common European future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your wise words. And the last keynote speaker does not need an introduction because we ourselves have elected her to be our Secretary General. So I now give the floor to Marija Pejčinović-Burić, our Secretary General of the Council of Europe. Marija.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée parlementaire, Monsieur le Président du Comité des ministres, Monsieur le Ministre, Madame la leader de l'opposition bélarusse, Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires, Mesdames et Messieurs. Le Conseil de l'Europe a été créé il y a 73 ans, à la suite de 2 guerres mondiales dévastatrices et sur une promesse de paix. Comme l'affirme notre statut, cela passe par une plus grande union entre nos États membres. Au fil des ans, nous avons travaillé à renforcer cette union au moyen de normes communes relatives aux droits de l'homme, à la démocratie, à l'état de droit. Ainsi, la coopération a bien souvent remplacé les conflits, permettant à nos populations de bénéficier de la sécurité démocratique à laquelle elles ont droit. Cette approche a eu des effets considérables et positifs. Notre organisation est passée de 10 États membres en 1949 à 46 aujourd'hui. Nous nous sommes dotés d'une Convention européenne des droits de l'homme que tous les États ont ratifiée. Cette convention est interprétée par une Cour dont les arrêts sont contraignants. Nous avons produit 223 instruments juridiques qui continuent d'améliorer nos vies, tout comme chacun des arrêts de la Cour. Toutes les parties du Conseil de l'Europe, notamment l'Assemblée parlementaire, le Congrès et le Bureau de la Commissaire aux droits de l'homme, jouent un rôle spécifique pour promouvoir nos buts communs. Ce que nous avons réalisé ainsi n'a d'équivalent sur aucun autre continent. Mais cet édifice est soumis à de fortes pressions. La montée des extrémismes populistes et nationalistes est une menace directe pour nos valeurs, pour le multilatéralisme et pour la sécurité démocratique. L'exemple le plus manifeste en est bien sûr l'agression brutale commise par la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine, qui est l'un de nos États membres. Le mois dernier, à l'occasion de la Journée de l'Europe, je me suis rendue personnellement en Ukraine afin de montrer clairement où se joue son présent et son avenir, et pour constater par moi-même les ravages de la violence dans le pays. Je n'oublierai jamais ce que m'ont rapporté le président Zelensky et de nombreux autres Ukrainiens, dont le courage n'a d'égal que leur attachement envers leur pays et leur foi dans son avenir démocratique et européen. Pas plus que je n'oublierai ce que j'ai vu à Borodianka et à Irpin. Les souffrances endurées confirment que la décision d'exclure la Russie du Conseil de l'Europe était la bonne. Toutes les parties de notre organisation l'ont soutenue, tout comme nous sommes maintenant tous unis aux côtés de l'Ukraine. C'est pourquoi nous avons pris la décision de rouvrir notre bureau de Kiev, d'apporter notre concours au bureau de la procureure générale pour les enquêtes sur les violations flagrantes des droits de l'homme et adapter notre plan d'action pour l'Ukraine à la lumière des réalités sur le terrain. Lors de la session ministérielle de Turin, le mois dernier, les États membres ont approuvé ces ajustements. Ils ont aussi indiqué clairement que le Conseil de l'Europe ferait usage de tous ces instruments pour que la Fédération de Russie rende compte de toutes les violations des droits de l'homme commises. This is the right approach. Upholding the principles of democratic security requires political will, the determination to support Europeans who believe in our values and those who are deprived of them in practice. So I was pleased also that the ministers who gathered in Turin reaffirmed that civil society plays a vital role in achieving this organization's aims. This is true also for the Russian Federation and for Belarus, where national leaders have spurned them. Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, you have spoken again today with clarity, courage, and conviction about the situation in your country. And moving forward, we will find the best ways in which to engage with the opposition in exile and the range of civil society voices that still exist among Belarusians despite the pressure that they endure. This was discussed last week at our rapporteur group on democracy, again here today. And I know that you will soon appear in front of our Committee of Ministers, as we all consider the most effective way forward in line with our mandate as an intergovernmental organization. It is a tragedy that the Russian Federation has broken with modern Europe, and that Belarus has closed its eyes to a European perspective, despite this organization's long-held hope, confirmed at our 2005 Warsaw Summit, that the country would reform and take its place in our European family. Clearly, that moment is not now. But the long-term goal of democratic security on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, uniting all parts of our continent, must and will remain. But in seeking this future, we must ask ourselves whether we are well equipped as possible to achieve it, whether we have the right approach to these fast-changing times. So I welcome Member States' request to set up a high-level reflection group to consider our response to the new realities and challenges on our continent. I have already selected 7 members of the high standing, and the group will start its work next week. But I'm also of the view that we need all of our member states to come together and decide on the future role of this organization. to agree on how we best fit in the newly shaped geopolitical architecture of Europe. That is why I believe that the time has come for a fourth summit of our heads of state and government. This could happen as early as November. And the clarity and unity it should deliver could put democratic security on a firmer footing for the years to come. Dear friends, there are learned people who argue that we are in a twilight of democracy. I do not agree. The fading of the light in Europe is not inevitable. In 1949, this organization was established to illuminate a better way forward, a bright and just future for all. Since then, we have benefited so much from human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Let us now work together in these hard times so that future generations benefit further still. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does it function? Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General, for your inspiring words. We now have listened to you. You now are going to listen. We are now going to listen to the members of the Assembly, because we are in a parliamentary assembly, and people have made it clear that they want to make their remarks and comments, and they are going to do that, and they are going to show that in 1 minute you can say a lot. And the first one who is going to prove that you can say a lot in 1 minute is Mr. Frank Schwabe, representing the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Frank, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Dear Mr. President, dear Ministers, dear Secretary General, dear Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, and I think we have no doubts if in Belarus, Belarus would deal with the values like we understand it, you would be the elected president of Belarus. So thank you very much that you are accepting our invitation, and thank you very much that we share common values and some common aims for Europe. And we express this in a report in April we decide here in this assembly. And we agree the best would be that if we would have everywhere in Europe democratic governments who respect our values. But since this is not the case, and this is for sure not the case in Belarus, we have to find another space for those who are committed to our values in the countries, coming from the countries, and at the end respecting and loving our values. And so, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, you make a proposal of a steering committee, and I would like to say in the name of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens, we agree that we need common approach, a common work together to see how we can create such spaces, opportunities and connections between us.
Thank you very much, Frank. And the next minute will be for Alexander Pejčinović, the chairperson of the EPP CD group. Alex, you have the floor.
Chers collègues, Madame Tsikhanouskaya, président du groupe PPE polonais, je suis très heureux, chère Sviatlana, de vous accueillir dans cette assemblée, dans cette maison commune européenne qui a pour vocation de défendre la démocratie et les droits de l'homme sur les continents européens. Je rappelle à nos collègues que vous êtes l'une des principales icônes de l'opposition biélorusse au régime de Loukachenko et que votre époux, comme plusieurs centaines de compatriotes, a été lourdement condamné en Biélorussie sous faux prétexte des troubles à l'ordre public. Certaines de vous exiliés, contraintes de vous exilier en Lituanie, vous incarnez désormais le visage de l'opposition biélorusse et les signes, vous êtes les signes que la majorité du peuple de Biélorusse n'a rien à voir avec son régime. Nous serions très heureux de vous entendre, chère Sviatlana, sur la situation actuelle en Biélorussie et les conséquences de la guerre menée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Pour plus que 30 ans des années, trois peuples ont été ensemble dans la même république. Ainsi, je vais terminer par trois vocations. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, żyje Białoruś, szczęście wmerła Ukraina. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Alex. The next minute goes to Zsolt Nemet, who represents the group of the European Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have been discussing the European future in the past 1 hour. Yeah, it now seems to work. Okay. So two historical decisions are in the pipeline this week at the European Summit. Ukraine and Moldova are going to get the European candidate status. But unfortunately, there is a thorn in this rose. Georgia, a country which was the first victim of the Russian aggression, remains deprived of this candidate status. Dear European ministers, two of you are here. What a mistake. This is a surprising and unacceptable discrimination by the Commission in my reading. May I ask you, both of you, can Georgia hope for your support in this question? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. Now we are going to listen to the new president of the group of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, Mr. Julian Bulay. Julian, your minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear members of the panel, dear Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, welcome to PACE. We are very happy to have you here in the hemicycle. Dear Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, your presence here is an explicit sign of support of this Assembly to the democratic efforts of the Belarusian civil society. 2 years ago, Belarusian people massively protested against injustice and dictatorship. Today, many are in prison. We are proud to count you, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, among the European democratic community. The place of strong civil society fighting dictatorship and defending democratic values belongs to this Assembly. We now live in a new political context. Totalitarian regimes are back to Europe and it threatens our security. Dear colleagues, dear President of PACE, dear Secretary General, if we want to be relevant in this new context, we should think of new institutional ways to include into the work of our organization the democratic forces of Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. And now the last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Madam Nina Kasimati. She speaks on behalf of the United European Left. Nina, you have the floor.
It has been, dear learned friends, it has been said in manifold cases by willing observers that Turkey is an important player in the Ukraine crisis. Yet, it is by no means a predictable one or a principled one. In fact, Ankara, the evasive neutral, is known for taking arduously advantage of instability in order to promote its own interests. It is regrettable that Turkey insists on its illegal and provocative practices. Only recently, they have put forth in a most formal way unfounded claims that Greece's sovereignty on its eastern Aegean islands depends on their demilitarization. In their letters to the United Nations Secretary General, they openly question Greece's sovereignty over all the islands facing the Turkish coast, from Samothraki to Castellorizo. The absurdity of this proposition has been signaled by the international community in a most unambiguous way. We would appreciate if key international actors, such as the Council of Europe, take action on this matter to give true meaning to the notion of upholding democratic security, as well as security in its own soil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Le prochain orateur est M. Alain Milon de la France. Alain?
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre, Madame Tsikhanouskaya, mes chers collègues, en janvier dernier, des milliers de migrants irakiens ont été amenés en Biélorussie dans le but de les inciter à entrer illégalement en Pologne, en Lituanie et en Lettonie. Cette utilisation de migrants comme arme à des fins de déstabilisation des États voisins est profondément révoltante. Madame Tsikhanouskaya, vous incarnez l'espoir pour de nombreux Biélorusses opprimés par le régime d'Alexandre Loukachenko. La Biélorussie n'est pas membre du Conseil de l'Europe. Qu'attendez-vous de notre organisation aujourd'hui? Comment pouvons-nous aider la société civile biélorusse, mais aussi demain la société civile russe, que nous n'oublions pas après le départ de la Russie du Conseil de l'Europe?
Merci beaucoup, Alain. The next speaker is Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland. Kimmo, 1 minute for you.
Mr. President, I'm more than pleased to see the leader of the democratic Belarus, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, here with us today. We have obviously followed very, very carefully the development in your country, in particularly after the 2020 presidential elections and the huge demonstrations throughout the Belarus, people demanding democratization. They expressed the will of the people very, very, very clearly. We have understood that the basic principles in your efforts for democratization is, first of all, the transformation must be peaceful. Secondly, without no foreign intervention. And obviously, thirdly, to be based on dialogue. Madam Tsikhanouskaya, I would like to ask you, do you still share those views? And secondly, I want to note that we took a very clear note what you said concerning how to strengthen the efforts of Council of Europe to support the democratization in your country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimmo. And now I call Madam Fiona O'Loughlin from Ireland. Fiona?
Mr. President, and thank you to our distinguished panel for your strong commitments to democracy and, of course, for your inspirational words. In this chamber, we come across very many important challenges and issues, and they always feature highly in our agenda, but I think today's debate is the most important one. And we always have to remember that alone we cannot fix the challenges, but we have the power of the collective. Minister Coveney spoke about the meaning of fáilte. Well, I'm going to give another few Irish words, Níneartha Cur le Chéile, and that means that we are really, really strong together, and we have to stand together in the face of tyranny and aggression. When we look at the key pillars of democratic security, every single one of them has been attacked since February the 24th. We also have to ensure that our values endure and our standards and commitment to ensuring the rule of law and democracy must also. It's interesting that John F. Kennedy spoke almost 60 years ago about Ireland not being neutral between liberty and tyranny. And while we value our military neutrality, I have to say that we have a proud record in peacekeeping, and our colleagues here from Ukraine and indeed from Belarus have no doubt that we stand with them. Slava Ukrainia.
Thank you, Fiona. And now I give the floor to Ahmet Yildiz from Turkey. Sorry, Ahmet, I went a bit too fast. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, another Greek member misused her position as Speaker of a political group to baselessly accuse Turkey. If she is curious about Turkish contribution and help to Ukraine, she can ask, she can get information from Ukraine negotiators and Ukrainian delegation here. Of course, there are many Turkish-Greek disputes to be dealt with negotiations, but one thing is clear: the islands are in demilitarized status by agreements. And this is it is Turkish right to emphasize it everywhere, and it is my right to do it here. My question is about the topic of panel about terrorism. Terrorism poses threat both to security and democracy. And even it complicates the international relations recently. Unfortunately, the international cooperation on this issue eroded. Even sometimes the states are insensitive, and sometimes subcontract their security business to terror organizations. Should our Council of Europe, be in a position to contribute for a new work in the UN to put this on track? Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Now we are going to listen to Madam Suna Eversdottir from Iceland. Suna?
Mr. President, thank you. Ministers, Madam Tsikhanouskaya, great to see you here, and thank you for this debate. First of all, as the General Rapporteur of this Assembly for the Status of Human Rights Defenders, I'd like to say that I've presented or requested that we make a concept note in the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights about how we can strengthen our relationship with civil society in Belarus, but also in Russia, so that we can further collaborate with you. I think that your idea about a steering committee is a good one, and I will help as I can to further that idea. As the rapporteur for political prisoners in Russia, I would also like to say that the weapon of imprisoning people for speaking their minds, and I know that this is also a problem in Belarus, is one of the strongest weapons against democracy. And that is why reports and fights against this kind of scourge on democracy is so important. That's why we must ensure that we keep the names of political prisoners high on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Suna. Now we are going to listen to Madam Isabel Meireles from Portugal. Isabel?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. Le recul de la démocratie en Europe est une menace qui dérive ces jours-là de l'agression non provoquée et injustifiée de la Fédération russe contre l'Ukraine. C'est vrai que les questions de défense pure et dure sont exclues des attributions du Conseil de l'Europe, mais pas la défense de la démocratie. Je dirais même que c'est son core business. Belarus inclus, vous avez notre appui, Madame Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, et merci aussi d'être venue. D'ailleurs, le Conseil de ministres a pour la première fois appliqué très bien, à notre avis, l'article 8 du statut en vue de retirer le statut de membre du Conseil de l'Europe à la Russie. Et ici, le Conseil de l'Europe joue un rôle fondamental en soutenir la coopération transfrontalière et d'autres efforts visant à désamorcer les tensions et promouvoir la compréhension au niveau local et de la société civile. Pour finir, la seule question que je pose, c'est si, malgré tout, il est suffisant de demander aux États membres d'allouer plus de ressources financières et personnelles sans avoir un plan très bien défini et structuré et pas seulement des mesures ponctuelles pour la défense de la démocratie européenne. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci à vous, Isabel. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Vladimir Vardanian from Armenia. Vladimir. He's not there, so we are now giving the floor to Mr. José María Sánchez García from Spain.
Merci. Oui, Monsieur le ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République d'Irlande a dit que la démocratie n'est pas seulement une question de majorité des voix obtenues dans les élections, mais aussi une question d'indépendance du pouvoir des tribunaux et aussi une question de respect du free speech. Je dois dire que même si on est en train de parler de la Russie, et bien sûr ça nous concerne tous, cette agression de la Fédération russe contre la République d'Ukraine, mais en fait il y a dans des nations de l'Europe, et c'est le cas de l'Espagne, une certaine attaque au pouvoir des juges et de leur indépendance, ce qui a été mis en évidence par la Commission européenne, mais cette initiative ou cet élan du gouvernement contre l'indépendance des juges n'a pas terminé, malheureusement. Et il en est de même pour la question du free speech. Il y a une certaine ambiance et certaines mesures que le gouvernement voulait prendre contre la liberté de communication dans les réseaux sociaux. Et heureusement, cela n'a pas eu de suite, mais il faut être très attentif, penser au fait que le gouvernement espagnol c'est une coalition où il y a un parti nettement communiste qui a une interprétation de la démocratie tout à fait différente de la démocratie telle qu'elle est entendue par le Conseil de l'Europe. Merci.
Merci à vous. Now we call Mr. Anastasios Chatzivaziliou from Greece. Anastasios.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, we welcome Sviatlana that she always sends a very strong message from Strasbourg in every case. So after the despicable Russian invasion, we should send a strong message that revisionism should not be tolerated, and we have to work about democratic security. So to my opinion, we need a definition for real and imitation democracies. We need a distinction between democracy and autocracy, and it's high time to do that right now. So I believe that we need new instruments that will help us to prevent breaches of our common standards, of our common values. And as I'm coming from Greece, I would like to tell you that Turkish provocations against third countries, against Greece and Cyprus, for example, is not a bilateral issue, as my colleagues from Turkey have said. It's a European issue. It's a matter of democratic security when you claim sovereignty over a third state. So we have to be more precautious. So I would like to ask you, do you agree that we have to move forward to become more resilient, to have new tools and instruments? Otherwise, I'm afraid that an institutional undermining of our organization is coming and it might happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to listen to Madam Salma Zahid from Canada. Salma?
Representatives from democratic countries, we must do our part to promote the institutions we serve and the real value they provide to our fellow citizens. As the concept of democratic security suggests, we should promote democracy not as an end in itself, but as a means of achieving outcomes to which every country strives: harmonious societies, prosperous economies, and effective public institutions. We need this message more than ever. According to Freedom House, the level of democracy has been declining globally for 16 consecutive years. Canada has long supported democratic development around the world, and in 2020-2021, Canada devoted more than $150 million in development assistance to initiatives related to the promotion of democracy. Canada also supports electoral observation, including through the NGO Canada. Promoting democracy is about recognizing the mutual benefit of building strong institutions and engaging in genuine dialogue. And as the Council of Europe has demonstrated, it can make meaningful contributions to all the societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salma. Now, the last speaker in the debate will be Mr. Alexander Nikolowski, because we need time for our keynote speakers to react. Alexander, you have 1 minute.
Crucial debate, and thank you for opening it for the Parliamentary Assembly for Council of Europe in this period of war in Europe that nobody expected it would happen in 21st century. I think what we should think a lot is, as it is as well in the headline, upholding the democratic security in Europe, because the democracy is under threat. Populist movements rise all around the continent. They play with the feelings of the people. They play with the economic injustice. If you want, even with that, whether someone is from rural or urban area. And that is something that might hit the democracy, and by that, the stability and security on the continent, which is already under a huge, huge danger. And that's why it's good, the Parliamentary Assembly, to rethink and to discuss about many, as well, of the documents that are core of this Europe that we know about, not about the substance is excellent, but how to make mechanisms that will create an atmosphere for their implementation. Not only the European Charter for Human Rights, but many, many other resolutions that we vote for here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alexander. And sorry that I have to interrupt the list of speakers, but I think it is a matter of politeness that we that we give the floor now to our keynote speakers to react. You performed excellently. In 1 minute you said a lot. Now I invite our keynote speakers to also say a lot and also a few minutes, because we have about 50 minutes in total. Mr. Minister Coveney, could I first give you the floor? And there are microphones next to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for everybody's comments, and I have to say I'm really pleased to hear just how strong the support is for Sviatlana in particular in terms of the challenges and struggles of Belarus in the context of what we've witnessed in recent years, which Sviatlana itemized, I think, very directly in what she had to say. So I hope that the Parliamentary Assembly will take up the challenge of putting in place a formal structure that can strengthen the relationship between the Belarusian opposition and this Parliamentary Assembly to ensure that we can provide a platform for democratic ambition and truth when it comes to Belarus. I think there's been, in some ways, a difficulty since the enormity of the war in Ukraine. The messages coming out of Belarus have been harder to hear because of the strength of the message and media coverage and extraordinary human suffering that has resulted in Belarus as a result of Russian aggression, or sorry, in Ukraine as a result of Russian aggression. And we cannot and should not allow ourselves to lose focus on the challenge that we face collectively to facilitate the transition, the peaceful transition through dialogue, we hope, to democracy in Belarus also. I mean, there's a lot of commentary here on the need to protect against populism, against autocracy, and to promote human rights. I think, you know, if I'm to comment on that, certainly from my experience politically, if we reduce the number of targets that we're going after, well, then we're more likely to achieve end goals. And what I mean by that is that the Council of Europe, in all of its institutions, has a very specific focus around supporting democracy and protecting citizens' human rights through the rule of law and the implementation of court judgments and, of course, consistency with the Convention. And I think that is where our focus needs to be. And as and when countries, some of whom are members of this organization, move away from those key principles, then I think there's got to be mechanisms that highlight that quickly and show that there is a cost to moving away from the commitments that countries have signed up to. And it's what that cost entails, I think, is what we need to decide over the next 12 months or so, because the war in Ukraine is an extraordinarily significant wake-up call for this organization, in my view. If we are serious about protecting people's human rights and protecting democracy across the continent of Europe, well, then we've got to have mechanisms that provide deterrence to countries moving in a populist, anti-democratic direction. And that's why, in my view, the only way we can do that in a comprehensive way is to get our heads of state to recommit to an infrastructure that's necessary to allow these institutions, its court, its parliamentary assembly, its ministers, to actually have effectively a new rule book to operate to in response to the challenges that we face today. So I hope that's a response to what I get as frustrations and anxiety around the capacity for the Council of Europe to do what European citizens needs us to do. And it's our generation of politician that has to make this happen. This is not about history. It's about today and how we learn lessons from the extraordinarily tragic history of our continent. Lessons that I think many of us thought we had learnt until this invasion began on the 24th of February. But as Sviatlana and others remind us, of course, Ukraine and the aggression there is not the only part of this continent that needs the focus of this institution. So thank you for your comments, and I'll have an opportunity to take questions later, perhaps on some of the detail of what I've just referred to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Now I would like to ask Madam Tsikhanouskaya to react on the many comments that were given in her direction. Sviatlana.
So, first of all, thank you for everyone who said warm words towards Belarusian people and our position at the moment. First of all, one main remark. I ask you stop calling Lukashenko president of Belarus. He is not. He doesn't represent the will of Belarusian people. He lost the election in 2020, and since then, Belarusian people are fighting against him and against dictatorship in our country. Thank you. Second, we still insist that the changes for democracy in Belarus has to be peaceful. And through negotiations, through dialogue, we always insisted on this and sent clear message. And but of course, we have to understand that there are two red lines in any negotiations. First one is that before any dialogue, all the political prisoners have to be released out of prisons, because their conditions are awful. People are really suffering. They are isolated there from communication. They are deprived of normality, and they are believing in us. They are believing in you. So without all of them are on the freedom, no context, no negotiations, no dialogue. And the second one, any negotiations should be between regime and democratic forces or Belarusian people, not between regime and Europe, not between regime and Russia, only in this scenario, because Belarusians have to be involved into all processes. We are speaking on behalf of the majority of Belarusians. And how Council of Europe can be helpful in our course. Of course, there are many items to work about. First of all, it's welcome representatives of democratic forces to the different hearings and events. The louder our voice is, the more power as people we have on the international arena. Also help us to prepare a package of reforms, electoral reform, participation of women and youth in democratic governance, local governance reform, because we understand that now we are fighting against the regime, but also we'll have to build new Belarus, and we have to work on this Belarus now to be prepared when the window of opportunities for us comes. We will be ready to build this new country. Also, it's very important to touch the topic of Belarus in the documents of PASE, because the war in Ukraine is linked to the situation in Belarus, and our fates of both our countries are interconnected. Help us in monitoring human rights abuses in Belarus. Sometimes we forget that atrocities, violence, tortures in our country are continuing. Every day, new detainees appear. Every day, NGOs are ruined. And recently, all the trade unions have been closed, and leadership of trade unions now are in jail. We have to speak loudly about this. And maybe it's all for now, but of course we have a lot of ideas how to collaborate closer. As I always say, non-conventional times need non-conventional decisions, and this steering committee is one of these unconventional decisions for us to be closer to you and for you to be closer to us. And thank you once again for this opportunity to speak here on behalf of free democratic people of our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sviatlana, for your remarks, and you have seen in the way our assembly reacted that the door is open here for you. Now I would like to ask Minister Haavisto to react on the things that he has identified in this rich debate. Pekka?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for very insightful comments from the parliamentarians. And maybe my just first remark is that we are living in a Europe where the security system has really collapsed. We have created 1975 Helsinki Final Act and all our organizations, OSCE, and of course the Council of Europe, to prevent wars in Europe. And now we are living in a situation that we are in the middle of war, and this just comes so close to us when we, for example, think that whenever there could be peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, how the security guarantees for Ukraine could be organized. We are missing those mechanisms currently, reliable mechanisms. We had 2 Minsk agreements, and these were not followed by Russia. And then who believes to the next agreements, and who guarantees the security in the next agreements? These are very, very crucial questions. Then I would like to give my support to what Sviatlana proposed, the steering committee or similar mechanism in the Council of Europe for Belarus. I think it's extremely important to support to the democratic Belarus and also the sovereignty of your country, because the sovereignty is under threat in these circumstances. My third comment is actually to Secretary General, your comment about the summit and the importance of the summit. Full support from our side to that. The colleague from Hungary asked about it's of course more to do with the European Union, but it was about the European perspective of Ukraine and Moldova and the negative decision on Georgia. I'm really concerned, of course, that if our relations to Georgia is somehow weakened, or our support to democracy and sovereignty of Georgia is not there, and I think we should really find mechanisms to support Georgia. I just met with the Speaker of the Parliament who visited Finland from Georgia, and fully sharing your concern about that. Of course, we have to also understand that there has been some backlash in the democratic development of the country in the recent years, and this certainly affected to the Commission's recommendations. To the colleague from Turkey, you asked about the terrorism and terrorist movements. You asked a very timely question, because we have just yesterday spent with the Turkish delegation several hours in NATO headquarters, Finland and Sweden, discussing also these topics and so forth. Issues like negative decisions on PKK or PKK as terrorist listed, of course, is self-evident for all European countries. I understand that, but of course it's important that we have a common definitions on what is terrorism in all countries, so that we can work together on these important issues, and I think this is an important debate. And then finally, I think Madam Sunna raised the issue of the human rights defenders. It's very close to my heart as well. And actually what we have been witnessing in whether it's Belarus situation or Afghanistan situation or Ukraine situation, that we are maybe lacking some mechanism in our system. We know the traditional migration, we know how to seek an asylum, but it's not always asylum that human rights defenders are asking. For example, those who are coming from Russia, they ask our support, but they want to keep also the possibility to return to their country in certain circumstances, and they need maybe our financial support and so forth. And particularly I'm concerned about the women human rights defenders and their role, and probably we should create some new support mechanism for particularly for these people. And thank you for the work that the Council of Europe has been doing for the human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Now I would like to ask our Secretary General for the closing remarks of this high-level panel. Madam Secretary General, it works.
It works well, yeah. Okay. Well, as I have more often possibility to address this audience, I will be very short, and we will talk also later on. One point of general remark is that from what we heard, and from what hasn't been said, but it's said in different occasions, one thing is for sure: we can never be complacent and sure that our democracy is perfect. So there is no such a thing as achieved forever peace, security, as we can unfortunately witness for our country, Ukraine. But one thing is for sure, that we all together, and each of us individually in our different capacities should do everything in order to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And I insist collectively, that means within this forum, within the Council of Europe, and individually in different aspects. And one word to Sviatlana and to your concerns. Council of Europe is ready and will support Belarus democratic opposition and civil society, and the work has started, as I mentioned, and I look forward to finding best way to do it, and I look forward also to meeting you in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. May I thank the keynote speakers for their contribution to this panel discussion. May I compliment the colleagues in the hemicycle for the disciplined involvement in this debate. This is not an end, but the beginning of a discussion. I think that was said. I appreciated it very much. We now have to close this panel, and we will be back at 3:30 here in the hemicycle to continue our program. Thank you very much.